I know.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the September meeting of the Committee on Budget and Finance and Infrastructure. As chair of this committee, I must remind all members of their duty under the State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict of interest. If you know of any conflict or appearance of conflict with respect to any matter coming before the committee today, please identify it at this time. Any conflicts? Okay, at this time, I'd ask Mr. Chris McClure if you would call the roll, please.
Chair Bullock,
Present.
Vice Chair Codis, Mr. Blaine, Dr. Jones, Mr. Meekins, Mr. Patel, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Turner, Mrs. White. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary McClure. Our first item of business to review and approve is to review and approve the minutes of our July 26, 2023 meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of the July 26, 2023 meeting? Those items were in the board materials that were provided to members of the board ahead of time. Okay, I have a motion, I have a say, and I have a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion carries. First real item of business is to review 6 proposed designer selections. These include Caldwell Hall accessibility improvements, North Campus elevator modernizations, academic affairs restroom accessibility upgrades, Fordham Lab process chilled water system replacement, Lineberger Cancer Research Center airflow reduction, and Moorhead Chemistry Lab renovation phase 2. All very exciting items on our agenda for budget and finance. Mr. Knuffman, if you would.
Thank you for that introduction, Chair Bullock. As Chair Bullock mentioned, the first 6 items we'd like to handle together, those are designer selections. The first 3 items listed. Let's see here. And you can see those listed on the right-hand side in the dark blue. The first 3 items listed are accessibility related. And you can remember the discussions around accessibility upgrades needed on campus during our all funds budget process. You approved these items for advanced planning at our last meeting. So here we're bringing them back for designer selection at this point. The next 2 items below that, Fordham Hall Lab and Lineberger Cancer Research Center airflow reduction. They're research building renovations, and those are funded with 1292 funds. You might ask, what are 1292 funds? Those are energy savings dollars that have been generated in previous years. And you're required to use a portion of those on future energy savings projects, which these fit that definition. And then lastly, the Moorhead Chemistry Lab renovation. That project, the first phase of that project was completed in late 2021. The project came in under budget. We are using the residual from that to help provide some additional renovation and improve the teaching environment. We're adding 6 new labs there as part of that project. So for all 6 of those projects, it's recommended the committee approve the designer in the order listed in your materials. Our team's available to address any questions, and this item does require a vote by the committee.
Members of the committee would check their material. The recommendations were the 3 firms in the following priority order: REID Architecture of Brooklyn, New York, Skinner, Farlow, Kerwin of Raleigh, and 310 Architecture and Interiors of Raleigh, North Carolina. Mr. Knuff, could you remind the committee and the board who the designer selection committee is on this? Generally speaking, who makes up that committee?
Generally, we have representation from our facilities team, and then also from the end user. So if it's a project, whatever academic unit or research unit, there'd be representation from there. On projects that are a little larger scale, often there'll be board of trustees representation on there. These are small enough that we did not have that engagement.
Okay. And are you comfortable with the firms listed?
I am.
All right, do I have a motion to approve? I have a motion. Do I have a second? Okay, is there any discussion? Anybody have any questions of Vice Chancellor Knuffman? Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion carries. Next on our agenda is approval of advanced planning spending authority, our next item of business, which is to request advanced planning for the pit, which we're all very familiar with, and stormwater improvements in the pit. Vice Chancellor Knuffman.
Yes, as you noted, many of you are likely familiar with that area and some of the standing water issues after big rainstorms there. High traffic area, increasing hazard and risk. We're requesting advanced planning of $150,000 to really determine the best way to address those moving forward. So happy to address additional questions. And this item does require a vote. But
Yes, Trustee Curtis.
I'm assuming that that addresses ADA as well, because given the size of the project, it'll trigger ADA compliance.
we'll be looking at accessibility as part of that. And there's even been conversation around whether it's an opportunity to really, that area hasn't been addressed in a while. And looking at that whole area and given the traffic and volume and just, so we may be able to look at it even a larger scale, but we wanted to get the project at least started now at this point to address the water base.
For members of the committee, Vice Chair Codis and I had a brief conversation about this, and I talked about it with Vice Chancellor Knuffman about taking a look and being open to the idea of taking a look at that at the pit, because it hasn't really been addressed, and whether there's some things that can be done. I know that I guess when it rains real hard, there's a lot of water puddles, so it's not as usable as it could be. All right, do I have a motion to approve? I have a motion from Chair Pryor, and do I have a second? I have a second from Vice Chair of the Committee Codis. And is there any further discussion? Questions, discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion carries. Next item on the agenda is sale to the North Carolina Department of Transportation, some land that the university owns in Chatham County. Vice Chancellor Knuffman.
I think we skipped one item, Chair Bullock. I think Avery Residence Hall was next.
I'll go back to that. Let's do the sale of the, let's do the sale of the property right this second,
Okay.
if that's okay.
That's Gordon. Yep.
Good afternoon. In front of you today is a sale of approximately 0.8 acres of land that the DOT is purchasing from UNC. It's scrub land. It's going to be used for a new parkway extension with all the development that's happening in Chatham County. The site is currently part of 79 acres. That is part of the Carolina Living and Learning Program, which is part of TEACH. And it's a very important program, but again, there's de minimis impact on this. As maybe y'all know, for new board members, when there's a sale of state-owned land, the state keeps the proceeds. The university does not keep the proceeds. They go to the state property office by statute. So in this case, the appraised value of $50,000 that we would be approving, that money would just transfer from one hand to another within the state, and we would not get those proceeds. At the same time, it's important, we did get state allocated funds to purchase that land and help build. So, but it does require, but because it's a disposition, it does require board approval. So I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all
Any
might have.
questions? Trustee Codis.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second? I have a second from Trustee Patel. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Gordon, before you leave, just for new trustees.
Yes.
Gordon Markline heads up the property, pretty much everything property here at Carolina. And he also works very closely with the foundation and the ownership of the property or a property that's held in ownership of the foundation and the real estate holdings. So that would include Granville, for example, and the Inn, Carolina Inn.
Correct.
And I know that and Trustee Patel has worked real close on the real estate holdings, just so for board members to know who Gordon is. Anything property related, and if you have questions or things that come up, Gordon's a great resource with respect to any questions you might have about property. Is that fair to say, Gordon? And I saw you in church on Sunday, but you got out of there. You must have been going to the soccer match.
We were ahead to soccer match. Yes, we did. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Gordon. And Vice Chancellor Knuppman, I thought there might be a little more discussion on Avery, so that's why I sort of skipped and wanted to come back to it. We do have also on our agenda the approval of construction and approving the manager of and risk selection for Avery Residence Hall. So Vice Chancellor Knuppman.
Thank you, Chair Bullock. This item is a selection of the construction manager at risk for Avery Residence Hall. Project budget's $32 million. It's funded with housing receipts. We view it as really an affordable and necessary project to address some needs and renovation needs in housing while we're continuing to work a little bit on the housing master plan moving forward. You might remember this project being mentioned last year when we went through the tuition and fee process and approved housing rates. We specifically mentioned the rates supporting the ability to do this project in the future. It's related to the next item we're going to talk about, which is the self-liquidating package. There's a separate action item about the debt that will be used to fund this as part of the self-liquidating part. I'll talk more about that in the next item. This action in front of you right now is to approve the actual construction manager at risk selection, which is LaChase Construction. And you might ask about construction manager at risk. That delivery method we chose in this particular instance, just because of the timing sensitivity, being a housing project and making sure that the housing is available on time by fall of 2025. So happy to address any questions.
Great. And could you remind the board of the $32 million path, the path of that money that it's been approved and the approval process and how we've got the ability to go ahead and let that project?
Sure. So it self-liquidating process typically takes about a year to unfold, and it requires 3 big steps. The first, the Board of Governors has to approve the project, the actual authority for the project. That happened last fall. Secondly, then the state legislature has to approve it as each year they take up a self-liquidating bill and they through legislation approve the project. That happened this session earlier this year. Then the third step is really approval by the Board of Governors and the Board of Trustees to actually allow us to actually issue the debt. So at this point, the Board of Governors approved this about a week and a half ago, and now this very final step, it's in front of this body for that final approval.
Do you have a motion to approve? I have a motion from Chair Pryor. Do I have a second? I have a second from Vice Chair Turner. Any discussion? Any questions, discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, great. That motion passes. Thank you, Vice Chancellor Knuppman. And now we'll move on to the item to request self-liquidating debt. So Vice Chancellor Knuppman.
So self-liquidating debt, this is following the process I just mentioned, outlining those 3 steps. This is really to approve our ability to issue debt for 3 projects. The one I just mentioned, the Avery Residence Hall, Bingham Hall renovation, and then the chilled water infrastructure project. Again, happy to walk through that process or to address any questions on these projects.
So as a reminder, Vice Chancellor Knuppman, could you just bring particularly new board members up to speed on the Bingham Hall renovation and what sort of the general outline plan on that is? I know for new board members, it might be instructive. I'm glad to do it, but you know this stuff. And if Gordon maybe wants to come up too, that might be helpful. Either one of you. Or both. No,
happy to. It's a project where actually we had approval to move forward back late 2001 and 21 and 22. Been paused somewhat in activity. We have a designer and we're beginning to move the project forward. We actually have an update on it later in the process where we're just bringing an update on all the major construction projects. But the project is moving forward. I believe completion date is scheduled for 25. I'll look to make sure that's correct. Yes, 25. And the overall project budget is $18 million.
Yeah, and just so review for new members of the board, Bingham Hall is currently not occupied. It's not being used. And it's for a reminder, I think everybody who's on the board, all graduates, alums, it's right there across from the undergrad on the corner where Wilson is and the undergrad, and Bingham that's right in the middle of campus. It's currently unoccupied, not being used. And so I think the administration, and you may want to speak to this, Chancellor, thought that Bingham was a high priority in terms of renovation and tackling.
No, it is. In fact, it's why I've asked Vice Chancellor Knuppin to talk about this with a few other projects later in this presentation. But it's it's not only a sort of a great sort of the real estate there is prime, and we moved the Department of Communications out of there several years ago, and they're sort of they've been some of them are in Bynum and some are over on Franklin Street, and would like to really try to get them back into this space sooner than later. And so we really want to try to move this forward. I know I speak for Dean Jim White and his colleagues in the college that it's been vacant for too long. So I'd love to move it forward as a priority.
Great. With that, thank you, Mr. Chancellor. Do I have a motion to approve? Have a motion from Chair Pryor. Do I have a second? Have a second from Trustee Jones. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, great. That motion passes. Mr. Knuppman, I'm gonna go out of order a little bit, and Mr. King, if you'll, it might be just easier since Mr. Knuppman's already up there. We'll go on and ask Nate, Vice Chancellor Knuppman, if he'll do an update on the finances of the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bullock. Today, I'd like to cover 4 big topics: tuition and fees, provide a quick update on the state budget. Again, we just touched on Bingham, but an update on a few of our major capital projects underway. And then lastly, we'd like to introduce the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Policy of the System Office, Andrew Kelly, up to really address the return on investment study. He recently addressed the Board of Governors on this topic. We think it's an important topic and that this board would benefit from hearing his comments. So he'll finish up this part of the agenda. So quickly on tuition and fees. Main purpose today is really just a reminder. It's that time of season again, and that we will be bringing final recommendations to the Board of Trustees for action in November. So if we look at this chart in front of you, it's that top kind of far right on the top line, and you can see. So again, we'll be bringing recommendations on rates, both tuition and fees, in November. We'll be doing a lot of work at the committee level and across campus here during this month of October. So our student fee advisory subcommittee, that's a group that's a cross section across campus looking at fees. And then our tuition fee advisory task force, TFAT, which is another group cross section across campus, will be looking at both tuition and fee proposals through that process. It's a lengthy process. It's a robust process. You can see the number of steps. It doesn't end with just the action by the Board of Trustees in November. We then bring that recommendation to the system office. The system office begins its review with the Board of Governors in December. There's typically even a workshop or a dedicated session at the Board of Governor level going through all campus requests. Final action by the Board of Governors is typically in the February-March timeframe. A key component to how we do this business and what we bring for proposals is really the guidance and what the guidance is. It's issued each year annually from the system office. This is very similar. What we received, we just received this guidance a little over a week ago. It's very similar to previous years. We have very limited flexibility on opportunity to adjust fees. So only really for critical items, we might see a mandatory fee request on something such as addressing some of the inflationary pressure on some of the salary increases. We just had a 4% increase in the state budget. Of course, fee supported programs have to find revenue to provide that type of salary increase. So a couple of our programs that are supported by fees, that may be under consideration. Again, we're going to be working through this during the month of October, but I'm just providing a little bit of a preview. In terms of tuition, flat for resident undergrads for the 8th consecutive year, but we can consider increases for non-resident undergrads and then graduate students. So
Trustee Curtis, real quick.
Just wanted to ask a quick question. So on the campus security fee, I know it's approved for up to $60 per year, $30 per semester. Some campuses are charging the full amount. We've got a prorated model that goes up to the max. Some campuses are charging 15 that then goes up to 30. I'd like to revisit that to make sure we've got adequate funds and that to the extent we're allowed to charge more, that we charge more on the security fee up to the limit of what's allowed.
absolutely, we can go back and confirm. I believe we are charging the maximum of the $60 per student for that fee.
On the cashier page, I think it shows a proration.
Okay. So we'll go back and confirm that, and we can address that during the process.
Thank you, Trustee Curtis.
This slide just really shows how some definitional, I think key definitions, when we talk about tuition and fees, when really student fees, again, starting over at the right, they really are, when we talk about that, there's really 3 different types. You can think of special fees, mandatory fees, and then there are application fees. Again, many of these are not, special fees and application fees are not allowed this year. We expect to see very limited activity in the space. There may be, again, a slight piece on the mandatory student fees just for those areas where there's salaries that are impacted. The middle column, school-based tuition, what that is, that's the premium tuition we charge on top of base tuition. So if you have a base, your undergraduate base tuition, and there's a base graduate level tuition for specific programs, graduate and professional, there's a premium on top of that, which is called school-based tuition. Last year, we saw about 20 proposals fit into that column. So unclear how much activity we will see this year. Campus-based tuition, again, that's that kind of base for undergrad and then the base for grad. And we do have some guidance there where resident rates are to remain in the bottom quartile of public peers. Again, we're not looking at resident rates, and the non-resident rates are market driven and reflect the full cost. And I do want to focus our attention more on that non-resident undergrad and grad. Here, just we're looking at the change in rates. This is a reminder about what has happened here at UNC-Chapel Hill over the past 5 years. It's a good foundation for looking at what might be proposed in November. And I want to draw your attention really more in the tuition column, the undergraduate non-resident. So the second column of numbers really over, and you can see under academic year 23-24, you see a 5% increase. And that's something the Board of Trustees approved last year. And we had a healthy conversation about a strategy, really part of a multi-year effort to close the gap with our peers on non-resident undergraduate tuition. And we kind of set that mark at 5%. And the intent was to kind of move forward with something along those lines. And again, it's more of a preview that we'll be having more conversation about that during October, during our SFAS and TFAT process, but something in that ballpark is likely to emerge. And quick reminder on why did we have that conversation, the factors we were thinking about as we kind of moved toward that strategy. I think one, when you look at UNC-Chapel Hill, you see an incredible amount of demand. The student applications continue to increase, incredible demand, great value. When we think about our revenue levers, they're limited. And so thinking about what we can do on what we charge non-residents makes sense financially. We will look at some of the market rates and what our peers are looking at here in a minute. It's also from a timing perspective, we've been spending a lot of time, I think really improving our budgeting process, our transparency and linkage to revenue in this way makes a lot of sense to have there be clear lines between what we're doing on the revenue side and how we're thinking about how those dollars are used. And then lastly, the system office just completed a big funding model change, and it makes some sense. Part of that funding model change was really removing non-residents and the tuition factor from how appropriation is generated. So in many ways, that was part of our conversation last year when we went through this, is really thinking about the timing. So looking at a quick review of the tuition rates. And you can see here, we're looking at Board of Governor peers. This is 22-23 data. By the time we get in November, we will have updated information for you to look at for 23-24. But it's not going to change that much. And when we look at undergraduate, the left-hand column, and we look at non-residents, you can see UNC-Chapel Hill at 37,550, and how that compares to the public average without UNC-Chapel Hill. You can see quite a delta there, almost $5,000 or 13%. And again, I think that was part of what we looked at when thinking about a strategy to kind of try to move more closely aligned there. I'll also note, if we look at the graduate side as well, you'll see a gap on graduate tuition. We do have the opportunity to think about that as well in terms of the guidance allows us to think about graduate tuition. And you can see quite a gap both on the resident and the non-resident side. And so I expect that to be part of the conversation for SFAS and TFAT in the coming month. So again, in sum, on tuition and fees, and this is more of a preview and just setting expectations, I would expect to see little to no action on fees, probably something on the undergraduate non-resident side, potentially something on the graduate side, and then likely school-based tuition. I remember I mentioned individual professional graduate programs. We had about 20 last year. I expect to see some. It's unclear what the volume will look like this year.
So Vice Chancellor Knuppman, on one thing, could you speak just to a little bit, because you mentioned it, the utility in your office of the unified all funds budget and how that has assisted in terms, I know you noted it specifically, and how you've been able to take that budgeting process and the fact that we now have an all funds budget over the last 2 years and how that's been a helpful tool. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Well, absolutely. It's a great planning tool. And I think it also allows us to really think about, when you think about the institution and its primary revenue drivers, one key component is tuition. And even within it, when we think about tuition, non-resident tuition is one of the areas we actually have some control over and some flexibility. So actions we take there and thinking about the dollars it generates and how going through a process and thinking about lining up those dollars against our top priorities as an institution. And that's really what that all funds budget process enables us to do and have a more, I think, strategic conversation about how to use those dollars. So I think it has been useful.
Thank you. Any Trustee Blaine?
I had a couple of questions, Vice Chancellor. On the salary increases for faculty and staff supported by programs funded by fees, is that required by the state budget? And then we have to go back and find the fees to support those increases? Or does the university have the option and we have the goal and intent of doing the 4%? So we need to go back and find the fee.
We have the option.
Okay. Correct. On the 3% increase cap, is that across all fees cumulatively, or is that only, or is there a 3% per fee cap?
It's cumulatively. So it's on the mandatory fees. So again, that's the student activity fee, debt service, athletics, campus health, ed and tech. I think I got them all.
Okay. Then you said there were 20 school-based tuition increase requests last year.
Correct.
How many were accepted?
All 20.
All 20.
But there were some that were modified, right? So we did through the conversation, some were adjusted based on either a differential, making sure there's a differential between resident and non-resident and protecting that. There was some adjustment to each, even in phasing and how they were implemented.
Whenever you get a chance, I'd love to see a list of the school-based tuition fees. Then I had a question too. Are those school-based tuition increases subject to the NC Promise requirements or not?
Well, not here
Like,
at this. It's
is a student guaranteed the school-based tuition rate won't go up for the 4 years they're in school, or can that be increased on? Okay. I'll ask you my fourth question later. It's not worth bringing up here.
all right, no problem.
Any other questions on the tuition? Yeah, Secretary White.
Oh, how? So their breakdown in enrollment, how heavily weighted they are to non-resident. It's going to be higher than North Carolina across the board. Some are closer even to half and half, like Michigan and UVA are moving much closer to that ratio. So we're somewhat unique with a much stronger emphasis on residents. I can provide that.
Trustee Patel.
I think one of the criteria we used last time around was just the sheer volume and interest from out-of-state applicants looking at UNC as a program, and that's why we were able to justify is not the right word, be okay with the 5% increase, because when you look at the values that we provide and the interest that's out there out of state, I think that interest does not wane if the pricing goes up.
Real quick, Trustee Cotis and then Chancellor.
I was just gonna remind everybody on the reason that the out-of-state tuition is allowed to go up, and we're not as concerned with that. We want to keep it affordable and competitive, but we've got the constitutional mandate to provide the benefits of the university to the people of the state, not the people of other states. And so this can help offset some of that cost. And it's required, I think, by statute that we price to market as well, so that we're not subsidizing that cost from in-state students or in-state appropriations.
Yep, good points.
Mr. Chancellor.
No, I was just going to add that these are real dollars we're talking about in terms of the differential between, when you start comparing our peer institutions, we are competing against most of them for top talented faculty and staff. And so I think, and I agree with what Trustee Cota said regarding in-state tuition, but I do think when given the opportunity to increase tuition for out-of-state students, be it graduate students or undergraduate students, that's an opportunity to help reduce that differential that exists between us and most of our other peer institutions. It's one of the few ways that we can continue to try to compete for that top talent. So I would just encourage you to think about that.
Vice Chancellor Knappman.
Sure. So second item I wanted to provide a quick update on was just very happy to be able to note Carolina's new budget that was ratified on September 22nd. An incredibly generous and strong budget for UNC-Chapel Hill. And I'll just note before I get into highlighting a few items, this comes at a time when the Wall Street Journal is looking at flagships and profiling a situation where flagships are amount of dollars, public dollars going to those flagships decreasing, and tuition rates more than making up for that in exchange. Here, we're incredibly fortunate to have very generous support. It allows us to keep and maintain tuition at an incredibly affordable level, and it represents a tremendous value proposition. And we just talked about that incredible demand. That's certainly part of it, is just the value. So I'll note that, and again, appreciation for the position we're in. 7% salary increases is an incredibly strong increase. That's in fact, it caused me to go back, being a budget guy, going back and look at the last 20 years worth of increases year over year. It's the strongest increase in more than 15 years. This budget also had very significant funding to the North Carolina Collaboratory, extensive capital investments, generous R&R. When I say generous R&R, $280 million to the system in fiscal year 24, and then $250 million to the system in 25. For UNC-Chapel Hill on the capital side, of course, a really important project to us, Keenan Flagler, the McCall addition, received a significant increase that's allowed us to address some bid increases there and really allows us to potentially add some renovation scope back into that project, which is great news. Of course, that's supporting some undergraduate expansion there. Nursing school, Carrington Hall, everybody's familiar with that redevelopment there. Sizable increase in funding. And again, that allows us to address some project increases. Gardner Hall renovation is slated for some funding in not till fiscal year 28, so a little down the line, but slated for funding. On the operating side, I'll just note a couple things. The School of Data Science, $7.5 million recurring, then another $2.5 million non-recurring in fiscal year 24. So great outcome there. School for Civic Life and Leadership, $2 million in both 24 and 25. And then on the enrollment funding side, if you look at the budget, you may see a large negative number for the system. There's a large negative $54 million. That's not what the experience will be here at UNC-Chapel Hill. And I think a lot of our sister institutions in the system are having some enrollment declines. That was a portion of that. We're set to receive $1.7 million recurring, and then some additional money for performance, which was really non-recurring at $5.9 million. So a strong outcome there for us as well. So obviously good news overall, and we're adjusting our budget and looking at that kind of moving forward.
So Vice Chancellor Knupp, I think it's important to note the $7.5 million in recurring funds for the School of Data Science, which is really strong, and we should be thankful to the legislature for their support of that. That is close. I mean, that may be close or half of the current journalism school's entire budget. So the investment that the legislature is making in the School of Data Science here at Chapel Hill should absolutely be applauded. And I noticed that Dr. Jeff Warren entered the room and the collaboratory's fantastic success story continues. So Dr. Warren, thank you for your work there on that. Thank you. Yeah, Trustee Blaine.
Vice Chancellor, I just had two questions. One, I was curious, I mean, it's nice to hear we met performance metrics to get our bonus. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what we've been able to accomplish to get that performance bonus?
Sure. There's 5 performance metrics that every school in the system is held to, and then we each had an option. Each institution had an option to identify one. We picked research productivity. So within each of those, and the other 5 deal with education and related spending per degree. 2 are debt measures, so really focused on debt. And then 2 are focused on graduation
Just
rate.
to clarify, you're talking about student debt leaving the school,
Correct.
not our.
Correct.
debt we
Not
just-
thank you for that clarification. Not UNC Chapel Hill's debt, but the individual resident student debt. Sorry. And so for each of those, there is a target or a stretch goal that is identified. It's institution specific. And depending on your progress, you were able to achieve a certain amount of dollars. I think it's capped at 3% is the total amount that you could generate. So we actually made a lot of, we ended up a hefty way toward that 3% in the first year, which is great. So that's what generated that 5.9 million.
So of those 6 goals, do we meet them all or?
I can get you more specific information on each. We did, it's a little bit mixed, but we did incredibly strongly on the research productivity, on the debt pieces. I think on the graduation rate, the first year we did very well. I think this last year, which will motivate next year's dollars. I think there's a little bit more work to be done.
That's great. I was curious too, talking about the budget, and we were talking about our peer institutions and how we lag behind in tuition revenue. How do we match up with our peer institutions in terms of support from state government and the taxpayers?
Yeah, our taxpayer support is incredibly strong. So when we look at it on a per student basis, we rank towards the top of the country, the top 3 or 4, depending on how you look at it. We're nearing $600 million plus to UNC-Chapel Hill. When you compare us to even, Michigan's in the almost $380 to $400 million range, UVA is around $200 million. So again, sizably more generous here at UNC-Chapel.
Mr. Chancellor.
It's a great question, trustee Blaine, and we are, we sit that number's probably in the 14 to 15% of our total operating budget, or at least it has been consistently.
Correct.
We're one of the few that are in double digits. I mean, most of our peers, I think that list that was there, I would bet that they're in single digits, if not closer to 5 or 6%. So we talk about that often, and I think Nate's correct. There may be 3 other states that support, Alaska being one of them, that supports per capita. There, Andrew Kelly's here. He probably can tell exactly who those other 3 states are, but Alaska is one of them. So we talk about this often, and we're grateful.
I know we'll probably have an opportunity in external relations, but I would be remiss if I didn't also mention, since we're talking about the recently passed budget, Amy McConkey and Chris McClure and their work that they did on Jones Street with the budget. So I wanted to just thank you too for your hard work. Appreciate it. Vice Chancellor Knuffman, sorry.
Sure. Quick update on some major capital projects. Then I'll hit a few of them here. I'll turn it over to Gordon to talk a little bit about the Coates building. So we've had some conversation, if you remember, some renovation options on that building. And then finally, we'll turn it over to Andrew Kelly to talk about return on investment. So quickly on the capital, these are some of the bigger projects. We've talked about some of these already. So but Carrington Hall, again, just received a sizable increase from the legislature. You've already seen this design in previous meetings. It's moving forward. And again, that's to support some expanded programming and enrollment increase at the School of Nursing. The completion date, 2026. TRB, or Translational Research Building, that is continuing to move forward. So we are opening bids over the next 2 weeks. And again, that's a project that's going to help us. It's going to allow us to increase vivarium and lab space and really just help us grow our research capacity. Expected completion fall of 2028. And then Bingham Hall, we talked about already. I will note just on the completed projects, Roper Hall, big ribbon cutting event last week. For those of you that attended, pretty incredible building and a lot to be proud of there. Supports the vision, school of medicine moving forward. And then in construction, of course, we've had a little bit of conversation around McCall and that project, which is underway. Again, very important, the support we just received in this legislature in the budget to allow this building. At first, this was bid at $150 million. Then bids came in at 180. And really, we've got support now to go up to $194 million, which really might allow us to put some scope back in that was cut out through the process. So again, really happy about where that's landed. If there are any questions, I can turn it over to Gordon to go through codes.
Great. Thanks, Gordon. Mr. Markline.
Thank you. For new board members, about a year ago, we came to you all with a request for planning funds to look at the renovation of Coates Hall. At that point, we were looking at just renovating the building in an as-is condition and adding necessary stairwell as well as an elevator system. Y'all asked us to look at the building from a more holistic perspective in terms of what was the highest and best use of the building, not only from the university perspective, but also, should we retain the building? Should we be looking at something else? So through that process, we engaged a third-party company called Development Concepts Insights, DCI. And they are basically a project management, construction management, real estate advisory firm. And we looked at the building we came up basically through a process with multiple options it kind of came down on 4 options. Looking at different ways we could expand the building and the program, but still having a baseline to what we had originally planned to do. So we kept the baseline of the Coates Hall building as a renovation only. We looked at the building as adding a 3-story addition. We looked at relocating the building actually, which seems difficult, but actually because the building sits very far back on the lot. And so there's a lot of land up front. So we looked at the feasibility of actually lifting the building and moving it forward and then providing for more space on the back for an addition. And then the last thing we looked at was a demolition, full demolition and new construction. And in that demolition, we also looked at current zoning, potential zoning, and this was sort of what we also kind of came up with as a highest and best use. So for instance, if we didn't own the land, it would more than likely be residential. And this is sort of the shell that residential could fit in. We haven't done any pricing like in terms of the land value of that, but we did. So then we took those 4 options and we went out we had an architecture firm as well looking at them. And we went out and with those kind of preliminary concepts that you all saw, these basically is these concepts and a little bit further push on each of them. We asked 2 general contracting firms to give us pricing. And of course, there's going to be a pretty wide variety because you're not necessarily defining the fit and finish or who the potential end user of that building would be. But I think it's pretty interesting to see that we had, as you'll see here, we kind of had a high end and a low end of cost and estimated square footage. So just renovating the existing building was anywhere between 7 million to 10 million, which is what the original projection that the university had come up with. But we had one general contractor who came in at 7 million. And then the same for all the different options. Probably, I guess about maybe, I don't know what it was, Kevin, 6 months ago or so when the honors college, maybe it was 3 months ago, started gaining some interest in looking at this space. And so we met with them and they started part of this. So we also looked at developing a building that could be used programmatically from a wide variety, right? We didn't want to necessarily do a special fit out for any type of use, but more generalized so that multiple types of programs, if it stayed in the university, could come in and be located here. So anyway, as we were developing that, we were sort of program agnostic, but the Carolina Honors Program had come forward and expressed an interest to fundraise for this. Internally, we sort of came up with on a dollar value as well as a square foot addition was that doing a renovation plus a 3-story addition to the building basically doubled the size of the building and was the best value on a cost per square foot basis, and gave programming and allowed us to sort of still continue to utilize that site, but also add to that. That program fits very well within what Honors Carolina would like to do as well. And they have not necessarily submitted a formal request. We haven't had this formal discussion around that, but they're very interested in pursuing the opportunity to utilize this building and to raise private funds to build that out. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the process that we went through. I think it was a very useful process for us to go through and look at a site that's not on main campus and sort of assess what kind of value does it have to the university. And as we found out, it was going along, there were some unique programs that sort of like that location of being on Franklin Street, but still proximate to the campus. So we certainly found several people within the university who are interested in remaining that location. But we also looked at, that we did not fully explore we developed a concept for what the highest and best use would be, which could then help us look at if we were to dispose of it. But again, if we were to dispose of it, we wouldn't maintain the proceeds.
I know that Trustee Cotis and myself and Chairman Pryor have talked about this. And this was the project that we have at least visualized would actually go through the foundation in terms of
That's
being
correct.
constructed. as opposed, similar to the way we do Rams Club projects. So
That's
if you
correct.
could just speak just real briefly to
Absolutely.
that.
Thank you for
new
bringing
board
that up.
members With
Yes.
respect to how we would maybe do this
Yes, thank
as
you. Chair.
opposed to a normal.
No, thank you very much for bringing that up. We actually did. We went and signed, we negotiated an MOU between the foundation and the university so that the foundation could go out and conduct this study and allow us to, to negotiate with the various contractors, et cetera, some things that we can't necessarily do under our current system. So what we would propose to do is it's a state-owned building. We would do a ground lease of the building to the foundation. The foundation would then go out and procure a general contractor to execute on this. And then the donor funds would be the payment source for this. And then when the building is completed, it would revert back to the state. And this again is Chair Bullock pointed out, this is a very similar process to the way we run the Rams Club runs many of the athletic facilities projects as well.
Trustee Cotis, did you have a question?
So on the various scenarios, what was the parking?
A really great question. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but parking, we were able to preserve the number of parking spaces and or increase them by one. So if you look at, so for instance, if you look at the top right hand, the Coates renovation plus the three-story addition, you'll see that there is you can go under the building. So you can park some cars under the building, but it's not a two-story building. It's a three-story building, but there's a notch out for parking. And then we also put some parallel parking on the driveway coming in. We worked with the town and showed them several concepts, including a parking lot in front of the building, which they were not in favor of. But we did, but again, they were comfortable actually with the parallel parking along the edge coming in. So we were able to maintain the number of parking and still utilize the ground area for construction.
So on the state-owned property, the town has
Zoning
approval?
jurisdiction. That's correct. They have zoning. It's some of the complications of this project too that we looked at were one of the existing zoning designation it's also in a historic downtown historic district. So those were several factors that we factored into the building, which is why sort of the demolition is demolition is the most difficult because you have to get permission. You can still tear the building down, but you have to wait a year before you can file for any kind of rezoning or any kind of permits. And then the town could potentially deny that. Right. I need to go back and look at that. We did a ground value based on the number of units. And it was a couple million. It wasn't like 5, 6, 7, 8 million. I want to say it was around 3 or 4, but I have that number. I just don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll get that number to you. Mhm. Yeah, right. Sure. Yes. That is one of the limiting factors to sometimes exploring that. I think in this case, because there were a couple of programs that you become very interested in the project, right? And liked the building and liked sort of like the style of the existing building and like the opportunity, but I like the opportunity to double the footprint. And again, sort of with the program willing to step up and say, hey, we'll actually go raise donor funds. Then it started, becoming a kind of a different scope and thought process as well. But back to your point, there are definitely going to be times where, we would like to be able to say this is a piece of land that does not have strategic value to us, but there's no incentive to dispose of it because you don't retain any of the proceeds. other than saying fine.
Mr. Chancellor.
I just want to thank Gordon and the team for working on this. I think these are great options. We do have two very serious donors that are interested in helping us to get this done sooner than later. I think that option that we discussed there, number, I guess it's the upper right-hand corner,
Right.
does retain the original historic sort of features of the coach building. I think it meets the town's wishes and picks up a significant additional square footage to meet the needs, especially for Honors Carolina and some of the other programs that are currently over in Graham Memorial. So it would be great to be able to move this forward.
And that's the option that also allow us to move that and the renovation only are the two that we can move the quickest because there's the least impact to the building and the neighborhood.
Trustee Valentine.
Does the town have architectural review over this and do they have a timeline and do they have final approval?
Yes, and yes. They have that. So, and what complicates it is because there is, and it's in a historic district and there is, there's a board that reviews. I mean, and they get down to the details, like, people actually who live in the historic district, who want to change their porch, for instance, have to bring, their design, to the board for approval. So it's a very, particular.
Okay, we have what time for one
Process.
more question, Secretary White?
You just quickly, I think, answered it, but the top two options are
I think the preferred option is to do the 3-story renovate, is to do the addition because of the pickup in square footage. And while of course you're expending more money, the dollar per square foot
and
is
it's
lower.
one of the faster options. I would imagine.
It's that's correct. It's as fast of an option, I would say, as just a renovation only.
And then forgive me if you've said this, is it currently being used?
It is not really. I mean, there are some offices there, but I think, to be honest with you, with with flex working, all that kind of stuff, it's basically an unused building. I mean, you'll see the occasional one or two, but it is very underutilized currently. Right.
Yeah, it's not usable. Trustee Halsey Evans, I'll cut it off after your question.
Have we had preliminary conversations with the town, with Anya, to clear any of these plans?
We had preliminary conversations with the town's historic district, historic planner, as well as the town's, short-term projects. So yes, we did take those concepts to them for feedback.
Thanks. Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Gordon. Andrew Kelly. Always a pleasure to see you, sir.
Thank you, Chair Bullock, Chancellor Guskowitz, members of the committee. Good afternoon. Good to be with you. Good to see some familiar faces in particular. I have the pleasure to be here to brief you on a significant undertaking at the system office that has implications for your work as trustees of this fine institution. We have been underway on a large scale study of return on investment across the UNC system. This is a massive study. It was undertaken at the directive of the General Assembly in the 2021 budget. The Board of Governors was tasked with contracting with a third party to conduct this review through an RFP process. The system office selected Deloitte Higher Education, and they have been hard at work over the past 2 years ever since on this. Filed is under coming attractions for now. The report itself and the resulting deliverables will be released in November. But the reason that I'm here and excited to be here with you is because the point of this is, unlike some other legislative reports that get filed and sent along and put in the filing cabinet, the goal of this is to use these results and use this information to improve the system's return on investment overall and for our individual institutions. I want to first thank the campus folks who had an instrumental role in this. This was a big undertaking. It's every program in the system, undergraduate and graduate. Lindsay McCollum-Farling from the finance team, who saw this from both sides. She saw it first at the system office and then as a member of Vice Chancellor Knuppman's team. Amy Hertel was the representative from the university on the advisory group. And then Rob Ricks was one of the data owners. He's from the institutional research shop. So thank you to them for their help. So as I said, the legislative mandate asked for a number of basic questions, increasingly complex as you get further down that list. The ones that really are most important for the purposes of the remarks today are detailed correlation between the degree of study and career roles and associated expecting starting compensation as well as expected career earnings. And then to use that information to do an ROI for each program, right? And an ROI not only from the perspective of individual students and the median student, but also from the perspective of the state. For the money that the state invests, what's the return to the state on that investment? The boundaries of this ROI study, students go to college for a lot of reasons. We know that they go to college to learn things that interest them, to follow their passion, et cetera. But a top reason that students always report for enrolling in college is to get a better job. That is persistently the #1 answer on the UCLA survey of freshmen. The focus of the study, to be clear, is on those labor market returns to college. There are important other measures of student outcomes that we could look at: student perceptions of their education, civic outcomes, physical and mental well-being, connectedness to the institution. Those are beyond the scope here. Not to downplay the importance of those, but just to say there's only so much you can cover in an ROI study. The resulting deliverables, if you will, from the study are 3 sets of dashboards. Okay, and the first set, as I said, is paramount here. Return on investment to students. This is at the program level, and I'll get into how Deloitte and team calculate that return to students. But it's available at the program level, and you can also drill down and select different groups of students, be they in-state, out-of-state, again, grad versus undergrad. And you can do this drill down to the 2- and 6-digit zip code. That's a fancy higher ed way of saying you can look at particular majors and particular specialties within the major and look at those lifetime incremental earnings. We also looked at ROI to the state, as I said. So for every dollar the state invests in producing another graduate, what's the economic return to the state in terms of the increase in earnings that's associated with that earning that degree. And then lastly, institutional context and Trustee Cotis, I'm glad you're here because I know these are questions you've been asking for a long time, including predating your time on the trustees when you're on the Board of Governors. So the institutional context dashboard is designed to provide the operational costs associated with delivering these academic programs and then map that to the activity and credit hour production of each of those meta departments. So the student ROI, this is an example of what the dashboards will look like. These are just dummy data. The chart there is dummy data. It's not the real thing. So that'll all be released in November. But this gives you an idea of what you'll see. And so what this is the projected lifetime earnings for a graduate, median lifetime earnings for the median graduate, compared to those projected lifetime earnings for an individual who didn't go to college and complete college. And you can sort of sum that if you think of that as the area under that curve, right, between those 2 lines, that's the incremental lifetime earnings gained by a graduate from enrolling and graduating from school, right? Remember, career earnings was one of the questions asked by the General Assembly in this study. The counterfactual, if you will, the fancy way for saying the comparison group here, of course, are people in the American Community Survey who did not attend college or had some college, no degree, but did not complete. So when it comes to student costs, yes, sir.
Sorry, so I'm unclear. Student perception of career readiness was not included. So I'm just unclear, like the bridge to like this type of graphic. We're not including something like that.
So we do have some data on student perception of the value of their education. It's a little bit dated now, but we did do a survey of all living alumni with Gallup. That was back in 2017 and 18. So we were able to ask alumni, how useful was your education? Are you working in the field that you thought you would be, et cetera? Those results, I'd be happy to supply the trustees certainly with this. This is solely looking at those earnings once you get out into the labor market. And to be clear, this analysis is based on the wealth of information that the Commerce Department here in North Carolina has. The Common Follow-up System goes all the way back to the mid-90s, and we can follow any graduate from a UNC system institution. We can follow them into the labor market through the unemployment insurance system, and we can actually get a sense of what their earnings are, right? And then you use those data to project out, right, to age 65. So I do, and the only other thing I'd say is when the dashboards do go live, you'll see there are a number of measures of alignment between what the system as a whole and what a given institution is producing and the growing fields, as well as at sort of the major level, how likely a graduate is to be working in a field that's aligned with that credential. So it's a wealth of information. It's a lot to get through, and we'll be making those public in November. So projected lifetime earnings, incremental lifetime earnings is important, but so is what a student paid to attend, right? So to get the lifetime return on investment, we got to subtract off what they paid to attend and earn the degree, and that gives us this student return on investment. Again, you can do that by the program, right? So you can see which programs have the highest return, and you can also think of it in terms of which programs are most costly and least costly, because we want to the student investment is measured not just based on the sticker price of tuition, but it's based on how long it takes you to complete the degree, all of which is derived from our data in the system. We don't just look at the absolute economic returns and lifetime earnings. We also looked at economic mobility, which is you take a student's, we know where a student's family income falls from their FAFSA when they come into the institution, and then we can look at them 20 years on and say how many students were able to move up and how many bands in that income distribution. And again, you can do that by program. So for some institutions and or specialties that may not be as remunerative in terms of when students graduate, but they may well be a pathway for students from the lowest economic quintiles to the middle class and above. This is a really fascinating way to look at this as well. On the state ROI, as I said, we take that incremental earnings, that incremental lifetime earnings by program, and we ask, how much does it cost the state to produce an incremental additional graduate? We do that based on the funding model. So that we sort of make some assumptions about gen ed and then major specific ed, and we calculate a cost to the state, and then we say, what is the earnings per state dollar invested? Those numbers look really impressive, in part because the outcome is measured over a lifetime, of course. So students earn a lot more with a degree over their lifetime. Yes, sir.
Per state dollar, are you talking about soft costs or including capital?
This is the incremental cost through the funding model. So it would be to say, if the state were going to produce another graduate, what would the funding model provide to the institution in terms of state appropriation to produce that graduate? It's an incremental cost as opposed to the all-in cost or all the appropriation.
So the state dollars are programming state dollar.
State dollar is per credit, so it's a set of credit hours, and we say how much does it cost? Yeah, when the institution submits those credit hours, for instance, to the system, what does the state basically pay out, right, to cover that cost? That's to reflect the fact that if you just divide if you just use the full appropriation, there's a lot in that appropriation that's not for instruction. So we wanted to make sure we were trying our best to compare apples to apples. And then lastly, this is the cost per credit hour. This is in some ways the conversation we've been having at the system level for many, many years. These are data that allow an institution and leadership at that institution to break down what are our different meta departments within the organization. What does it cost to produce a credit hour? How many credit hours are being produced, et cetera. This is a tool we think will be particularly useful for institutional decision makers. So, yes, sir.
So how do you account for maybe new fields? I mean, I guess if you've only had a particular major or field for 10 years, you just have a lower time period. But if engineering has become substantially more popular or more needed over the past 5 years, you still have a long trajectory in certain fields. How do you account for sort of the changing nature of the labor market?
Yeah, inevitably challenging because it's always backward looking, right? You always have to base it on what people who had the credential earned, right? And your estimate of the current return is better based on how using more data. But to your point, it may also not capture the slope at which that return is increasing, right? If you will. So it's a common challenge.
Can you look at it like, for example, pick a field, if it had a substantial increase, if nursing pay had gone up substantially over the past 5 years, you do have the data though and you could parse it out and say, actually, our nursing degrees on a trajectory that's even higher because of the needs in the labor force.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, the legislature through the directive to do the study asked a specific set of questions. I think what we're thinking about the system, and certainly with our institutional partners, is what other questions can we ask now that we have this assembled, right? And there's lots of them, right? One of which is some of the shorter term shifts in labor market dynamics. And also there's big questions about out migration, right? One of the things I don't talk about here is we will have data on what graduates stay and which graduates leave by program, and by student type. So it's an enormous amount of information. Again, we want to use it rather than file it away once it's submitted to the General Assembly. And to that end, I'll pause for questions in a minute here. To that end, I just wanted to give you an example of some of the questions that we have put on the table, if you will, at the system and with the Board of Governors in our last meeting. So the key questions there on the left, and then you got some examples on the right, and I'll summarize them real quickly into 3 buckets. One is, how should these measures of ROI factor into discussions about program approval and program continuation and curtailment? On the right, you see examples. Federal Department of Education has a gainful employment rule. Some of you may have heard of this. They propose to assess programs based on a debt to earnings ratio and wage premium associated with those degree programs. How should second bucket, how should these measures of ROI factor in, if at all, to those performance metrics that were asked about earlier that Vice Chancellor Knuffman outlined, and in particular into that performance weighted funding? University System of Florida uses some measures of labor market outcome in their funding model. And then, of course, what's the third bucket being, how should our system and individual institutions think about our obligation to share this information with students and families on their way in to the institution or to the system? And then just an example there from the UT system, they've developed a tool called Seek UT, which provides students with information about likely earnings for students. So Chair Bullock, in the interest of time, happy to answer any questions, but also happy to get out of your way.
Trustee Cotis. We'll let every trustee ask one question.
Yeah, y'all can probably see why Andrew is my favorite staffer in the system office. This is, my favorite thing to delve into, and I think it's going to be transformative for the university system and the state. What I like about this is it's, like I liked about NC Tower, it's real data, not survey data, not calling someone on the phone and asking, what did you make last year? And that's, you just get inflated numbers, and we're selling a product maybe that doesn't pay off. I think there's a real connection of what we do with this next is a truth in lending for student lending, so that when students are signing up for debt, they can understand what their prospects are of being able to repay it. And I think that's probably one of the most critical ones for us to address the student debt crisis out there. And I think the state ROI is just a fantastic piece of this. And I like the fact that it's focused on incremental. So this will be completed and implemented at what point?
So the study itself, which will be both a report, which sort of essentially encapsulates kind of the main findings, right? And the top line there that I'm happy to share is, and this is related, of course, to the discussions earlier about state support and low tuition, is the vast majority of the programs in the system have a very positive ROI, right?
Yeah.
That's a testament to the commitment of the state. So that report will give some of those top lines, also an outline of the methodology and the process, et cetera. At the same time, these dashboards will be made available to stakeholders. And that's where you can really dig in and look at, do different pull down menus and look at different groups of students and different programs, and also potentially compare across different parts of the university. That'll also be made, that'll all go live at about the same time, essentially, right? We're already hosting those. We're scrubbing the data, cleaning up last bits of feedback from the campuses. As you can imagine, lot of data points, a lot of opportunity for feedback. So
When can we get access to those?
I think that November due date, I believe it's November 18th. My colleague Bart Goodson has seared that date in our memory. I believe it's November 18th that this will all go over to the General Assembly.
It'd be nice for us just to have a preview before possible so that
Yes, sir.
we know.
We'll make sure you get the first copy.
Yeah, we like that.
Chairman
New
Pryor.
Christmas, bro.
Hey, real quick,
Yes, sir.
how much did this cost?
I believe the total cost, if I'm not mistaken, the appropriation for this, I believe, was $2 million. I can get back to you on that.
The bulk of that going to Deloitte?
Bulk of that going to Deloitte and their partner. They worked with some partners on this as well. That they were the sort of main fiscal agent. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Vice Chair Turner.
The report, will that include initial thinking on some of these key questions, or is that the next step?
Well, the process that we've outlined with the Board of Governors, you know, the research team was tasked with answering the research questions rather than opining necessarily on what we should do with it. And so the process we've laid out with the Board of Governors that they've laid out for us, I should say, is to compose as a group essentially a response to the findings and to have that accompany the material that goes over to the General Assembly, that would outline these next steps that the Board of Governors plans to take. Yes, sir.
So this is a more to come story. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We always appreciate having you here, and we're going to have you back when we've got the dashboard filled with data, and maybe have you in a full session.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Really, thank you very much. Okay, moving on, we've got a presentation from John King. John, come on up. For those members of the board who have not met John is the your president of the Chapel Hill Management Company, right? I think they call you president.
President of UNC Management Company, but
Yeah.
more importantly, Chief Investment Officer.
That's right. And so John is a great partner with the university, manages not only the endowment and foundation funds held by private foundations and the endowment of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, but because of the unique relationship the management company has with other constituent institutions, all but I think maybe two of the constituent institutions have all their money, including the hospital has its money with John King's group.
Right.
Great resource, always available to members of the board. And each year he gives an overview. So John, thank you.
So thank you, Chair Bolick. I know, I'm not quite sure what the time frame is here. I can do an abbreviated version of this presentation.
Hit the highlights.
Yeah, I'll go
And
through it.
we appreciate, know that Chairman Pryor and myself had an opportunity to get a lot of this information last couple of days, and just appreciate you being here to give the board an update.
So I'll skim through this very quickly. If anyone has questions around the material in the book, feel free to reach out and I can answer those questions individually, or I can come back to a future meeting, but let's cover it very quickly. So basically, we have a structure where there's a Chapel Hill Foundation Investment Fund. I'll start there. There's $5.1 billion at the end of the fiscal year. This is where the various foundations on campus combine their assets with the Chapel Hill Foundation, the endowment, into one commingled fund that is managed as a commingled fund. Everybody gets their pro rata share. We also have the entity that we manage is called the UNC Investment Fund. So that Chapel Hill Fund is then commingled with assets from other universities in the state. As Chair Bolick mentioned, that fund is valued at $10.1 billion as of the end of the fiscal year. Management company has 36 employees, including 14 investment professionals. We're a separate tax exempt entity controlled by UNC-Chapel Hill. We have a top flight team of investment professionals. I'd stack up against anybody in the country. So I'm going to quickly, I'll start by saying we had a weak year this year. It was a negative return in a year when equity markets were up. And so what was going on there? Our largest asset allocation is to an asset class called private equity, comprised of venture capital, buyout funds, growth equity funds. And private equity had a negative return for the year. And a lot of that has to do with the way it gets reported. So at June 30, actually in July, when we have to close our June books, we don't have our June 30 statements from the private equity funds. They give us quarterly valuations, typically 60 days after the end of the quarter. So what happened this year was we included the losses from the June 30, 22 quarter, which was a very weak quarter in public markets. Actually, I'll go to the next slide, explains that a little bit. In June 22 quarter, S&P and All Country World Index were down 16%. That's the quarter of private equity returns that got included in fiscal 23, this current fiscal year. And then this most recent June quarter was a quarter when we had strong private equity returns, strong public equity returns, and that gets reflected in fiscal 24. So there's a time lag in the reporting of the private equity, which is our largest asset class. If one adjusted for that time lag, we report a negative 0.4% return, but adjusted for the lag, our return would have been 4.4%. People say, well, why don't you report the 4.4? Because we have to report to our members we're required by the end of July to report a net asset value and a return to the end of to our members. And we don't want to have two sets of numbers out there floating around. So it would be a source of confusion. So we stick with the number. And what happens is over time periods, this washes out. If you look on this chart, over 3 years and 5 years, the returns are essentially identical, whether you, if you adjusted that quarterly adjustment each year or not. Over longer periods of time, it washes out. So a weak year for some kind of anomalous circumstances that took place, unusually big kind of swings year to year in private equity, but not, once again, long periods of time, it washes out. I'm going to skip through some of this. So this year, I think dollars are just as important as percents and numbers. This year, the market value of the Chapel Hill Investment Fund declined a little bit, primarily because we distributed $266 million to support university programs and development. This is the really important page. When you look at our long-term results, 3, 5, 7, 10-year numbers are still at or above 10% annualized, all well above our primary benchmark, above returns that are available in the marketplace. And despite this weak year, the 3, 5, 7, 10-year numbers are all still top decile when compared to peer institutions. And surprisingly, and this is very counterintuitive, very surprising, our 3 and 5 year rankings might actually go up this year because the schools that have better or have had traditionally better 3, 5, 7, and 10-year returns have more private equity than we do, and actually are reporting weaker returns this fiscal year than our negative 0.4. So it's kind of a really awkward or really kind of strange year. But the fact is, what we really believe is the most important number on this page is the 10-year return. We invest over 10-year time cycles. One thing I also like to talk a lot about is we protect in down markets. We build to have a great long-term return, but when the S&P 500 is down more than 10%, we're down about a third as much. And we do it consistently over time and through virtually all down markets. We're down far less than public markets. This is another very important slide. 10 years ago, the value of the Chapel Hill Investment Fund was $2.3 billion. Over those 10 years, we have spent $1.9 billion, or distributed, I should say, $1.9 billion to support this university and its programs. And the market value at June 30 is $5.1 billion. So even after spending almost $2 billion, we've increased the value from 2.3 to 5. It's a combination of gifts of $1.3 billion coming in, but also the investment gains are $3.3 billion. And then this is just a graphic of the annual spending distribution to support endowed programs that are invested in this fund. So over the last 10 years, it's grown from $123 million to this most recent June 30. We just distributed $221 million to support the university's budget. So that was my 3-minute version. On our website, the UNC Management Company website, you can find the annual reports. Now, there's always a time lag. We haven't produced the 23 reports. They'll be out shortly. But you can find our annual reports by following these click-through websites. So I moved through it very quickly, Chair Bolick, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Trustee Halsey Evans.
Thanks for that presentation. Do you expect the private equity return to improve once these investments are realized? Are these mark to market and therefore potentially far more negative than they actually will end up being when the market recovers? Or are they liquidated investments to your knowledge?
So one thing I'll just quickly go back. The private equity returns have been phenomenal. I skipped over this slide, but we've compounded private equity at over 20% over the last 5 and 10 year periods, and at over 16 for 20-year periods. These are phenomenal rates of return relative to what you get in the public market. We think that right now the private equity portfolio has reflected the write downs that need to be reflected, i.e. they had, one of the reasons we had a negative return this year is they had gotten kind of puffed up and the air's out of the balloon right now. Going forward, there's probably going to be a couple years when the private equity guys need to get back on their feet. There's a few IPOs, but there won't be a lot of IPOs. The sell of both companies and real estate has really been impacted by the rising interest rates. So we have a year or two here of probably some pretty flat private returns. But once again, I'll argue over 5 and 10 year periods, we're going to easily generate double-digit returns on our private investments.
And Mr. King, it is, we're slightly overweight in private equity. Is that correct? To my recollection?
Relative to our benchmark target, we're overweight. Relative to large university endowments, we're kind of middle of the pack. We're not, there are many schools who have far larger endowments or investments in privates, which is what I alluded to.
I appreciate that, because that's why I was asking, because relative to our peers and other universities that engage in what we engage, we're in the middle of the pack. As opposed to a regular asset allocation model, we're overweight private equity, but not with respect to other institutions that are gaining returns.
Yeah, and I'll just point out, in the top decile that I refer to, there are basically 2 universities that are consistently in the top decile. It's UNC and UVA. And what I consider our toughest competition are the wealthy private universities. They have very, very, talented people in their investment office, and we kind of follow that model of investing aggressively.
Mr. Vice Chairman Turner, you have a question? Oh, did I? Okay, great. All right. Hey, I'm glad you're a lot smarter than I am, so I'm feeling good today. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? Thank you, John. Your team does a great job. I've become a real believer in what you guys do, and really proud to have you on board. All right. With that, motion to adjourn. And let's adjourn this committee by acclamation, and let's take a 5-minute break for bathroom. Thank you.
Exactly.
We got
Hello. Vice Chair Turner and I were just laughing about, if you've seen the movie, Shag the movie, where the woman. Anyway, no one's listening. Yeah. Maybe with a grace. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the September meeting of the Committee on External Relations. As chair of this committee, I must remind all members of their duty under the State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict of interest. If you know of any conflict or appearance of conflict with respect to any matter coming before the committee today, please identify it at this time. All right, I'll ask Chris McClure to please call the roll.
Chair White.
Here.
Vice Chair Ballantyne. Mr. Blaine. Mr. Bryan. Mr. Everett. Mr. Codis. Mr. Meekins. Mr. Patel. Mr. Pryor. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Our first item of business is to review and approve the open and closed minutes of the July 26th meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a motion? Thank you. Trustee Everett and a second from Trustee Ryan. Great. Any discussion or debate? All those in favor say aye. All opposed? All right, the motion carries. And now we will put the item on the consent agenda for the full board's approval tomorrow. All right, our next agenda item this morning is it's this afternoon, to hear a legislative update from Amy McConkney. There's Amy, thank you, Director of State Affairs, and Kelly Dockham, Director of Federal Affairs. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Chair White, and welcome. It's great to have you chairing our committee. We have great news. We have a budget, and it's a good budget. It's a great budget for Carolina. The budget appropriates just under 30 million in the first year of the biennium and a little over 30 million in the second year of the biennium. Our state continues to grow, and you see that growth reflected in those overall budget numbers. The budget includes sort of the headline from the budget for us is that across the board state employee salary increase of 4% in the first year of the biennium and 3% in the second, for a total of 7%. I know our folks were really encouraged to see that funding for our faculty and staff. The budget expands Medicaid, which is something that has been being worked on over the course of many years. So that's notable. It also reduces the personal income tax, provided that certain triggers are met. It establishes North Carolina Innovation, which is something new and interesting that will involve us. It's an attempt to boost economic development around state universities by helping researchers turn their ideas and discoveries into successful businesses. So it's a new idea that the state is undertaking, and so that's notable as well in this budget. It also supports the creation of a new children's hospital. We're very excited to see that in this budget. It passed with bipartisan support. Also notable, Governor Cooper indicated that he would allow the bill to become law without his signature. So there's a 10-day clock. We're operating in that 10-day clock now. I think October 2nd is the day that the budget will officially become law. So what are we doing now? We're saying thank you. We're meeting with lawmakers, we're reaching out to them, and we're sharing our appreciation for the investments made in UNC and in higher ed in this budget. So you see a statement here by the Chancellor and another by System President Peter Hans on the historic nature of this budget and the investments made. So kind of big picture, looking at the UNC systems, priorities, they really were across the board, they were met. Those priorities include salary increases, which we touched on earlier, faculty realignment incentive program, that stands at 16.8 million non-recurring, performance weighted enrollment formula, which helps, and I know Nate talked about that earlier. Also huge initiatives for UNC Health and ECU Health, capital projects totaling $925 million across the system, cybersecurity funds. We know that's becoming increasingly important to secure our campuses from threats, and renovation money, $280 million in the first year, $250 in the second. That's non-recurring funds in the biennium. And finally, $148 million in individual campus requests that were approved in this budget. So moving down to UNC-Chapel Hill, we are so pleased, key priorities that that were approved through the Board of Governors that we worked on this session were funded in the budget. Computer science program expansion. We're so excited to see $7.5 million recurring, and then an additional $2.5 million in for startup money as we stand up our school. So those computer science money will support the application of computer science program expansion to data science applications in data science. So it's going to be very helpful as we stand up the School of Data Science and Society. Additionally, funding to establish the School of Civic Life and Leadership. $2 million non-recurring in both fiscal years for a total of $4 million. There were some specific provisions around the school and how it is to be set up, including the hiring of faculty, the programming that will be addressed. There's a reporting requirement to the General Assembly. So those are all, notable and things that we will work with you all, the trustees, as we report back to legislative leadership. Finally, funding for UNC-Chapel projects. You see the business school, 20 million non-recurring in the first fiscal year, 30.5 million in the second, for a total authorization of a little over $194 million. It's going to be transformative for our business school. Nursing school renovation, Carrington Hall, very meaningful work that is happening there. And Gardner Hall, that money was authorized. It'll come several years down the road in fiscal year 28. Have to mention the collaboratory as well. Jeff Warren and his team have done an incredible job, and they have provided a slide for me to share, which includes their appropriations over the years. You can see how it is broken down, but one thing that is notable that I want to share is the total collaboration money over the biennium, that includes new money, recurring and non-recurring, stands at $220 million, a little over $220 million. That includes, as you see, that sort of last, like the one that almost requires an additional slide on the top, I mean, to stack them, is from NC Innovation money, which will pass through the North Carolina Collaboratory. So appreciate Jeff and all the work that he has done at the legislature. It's doing great work around our state to solve problems. So the Collaboratory, they have multiple new research grants and projects that were funded through this budget, which include work on water safety. Often we think of that, the PFAS research that's going on, as well as next generation energy, opioid remediation, artificial intelligence, and digital engineering. Okay, so what's left in this session? Lawmakers will take a little pause, but they're hearing from the public actually this week, those on the redistricting committee. We will undertake redrawing of maps again. We've got a little deja vu, but lawmakers need to come back again to draw maps once more. We had court-ordered maps in 2022. Those maps can only be used for one election. So lawmakers need to come back and draw another set of maps, which they'll be doing in the coming weeks. Other business, lawmakers will return. They'll work through their priority legislation, possibly override any vetoes. And that work is sort of to be determined, has not exactly been announced what they will be working on. But as far as the schedule, I think the week of October 9th is a week to look at. We expect lawmakers to return, and should be a busy week on Jones Street that week. Okay, this is fun part for me. Outreach. What are we doing? We're on campus. We're at the legislature. We're across the state. We have some great campus events today. We've got the ribbon cutting for Innovate Carolina Junction. We've got some lawmakers joining, community folks. We've got dignitaries from across the state coming to celebrate that ribbon cutting. I know over 900 startups have been launched through Innovate Carolina since the late 1950s when we started keeping track. 106,000 jobs across the globe, accounting for 18.4 billion in revenue. Very impressive. It's also the only hub in the US located adjacent to a top 5 public research university. So excited for that. We also had the ribbon cutting for Roper Hall. Recently, a new home for our med school, and named for the former interim UNC system president, former dean of the med school and CEO of UNC Health. We had members of the board of governors there, and it was a great event. So finally, we've got the bus tour coming up. We'll be touring the state. We've got an east bus and a west bus. We'll be inviting lawmakers to join us where it's relevant to talk about the work that we're doing across the state. Lastly, we have Board of Visitors coming up as well. This is a great opportunity for us to talk about and promote what we're doing on campus with a group of really excited folks who are ambassadors to the university. finally, UNC App State, that was our big legislative football game. You can see some pictures from the game. We had 6 state senators, 19 reps, Council of State member, 6 of your peers on the Board of Governors. I think 8 of you came and joined us. And of course, we won double overtime, which is the best part. But it was a great event. Everyone looks forward to it every year. We got to do some great outreach around the good work we're doing on campus. And guys, that's a wrap. Yeah, glad to answer any questions if you have them. Yes.
I'd just like to say, thank you. Congratulations on all that hard work, Amy. And I know that's just how you drew it up at the start of the session, right?
That's right. Exactly according to plan.
All is well that ends well.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I just want to echo that point. You're incredible. You did a great job. We talked many afternoons as you were driving to or from Raleigh, and had a chance to go over there several times with you and with Chris McClure. Thanks, Chris, as well. Played a big role in this. And so we got to the finish line in great shape. So thanks.
Well, likewise.
Thanks to all of you that helped to advocate
Right.
for us as well.
Yes, thank you to all of you. I know you're a major part of this, so we appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, Kelly Duckham.
Well, I have to say, it's hard following Amy in general, okay? But after that presentation, because I'm really going to be the Debbie Downer here at the party, okay? So, typically, I always come bearing slides, to accompany my remarks, but I said this go around, I'm not doing it because whatever I prepare, it's going to be old news by the time I get here. So, my update today will be rather short, sweet, or unsweet, depending on who you ask. But going to focus on the current state of play as it relates to fiscal year 24 federal appropriations, and discuss the high probability of a federal shutdown over the next few days. What we know, see here I am grabbing it, thinking I have slides. What we know. We do know that we will have a new federal fiscal year that begins this Sunday, October the 1st. We also know that Congress has not passed a single appropriations bill for fiscal year 24. And because Congress has failed to pass 12 of these appropriation bills via regular order, they will need to pass some sort of a continuing resolution to keep the federal government funded and operational past September 30th. So again, that's this weekend. A reminder, a continuing resolution, a CR, for those who aren't aware, it is simply just a stopgap funding measure that will keep the federal government open under the previous fiscal year levels for a short period of time, weeks, days, months. So why are we here looking at another shutdown? Again, as I mentioned in my update back in July to this committee, I've been here at Carolina a little over 8 years. And in my tenure here, we've already experienced 2 federal shutdowns. The most recent one taking place December 2018 through February 2019. Also, that was the longest federal shutdown we had, lasting 34 days. And I will say, looking at the current dynamics, the environment on Capitol Hill, this shutdown situation is very unusual. And it's unlike any of our previous shutdown situations. We have a very extremely divided Congress, a very ununified Republican House caucus that controls only a 5-seat majority in the House. It's very tough to sugarcoat the situation. And I'm not. I'm going to steal a line from the title of a very well-known children's book. And funding negotiations are a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad place right now. So we're going to focus. The question is why? Why are we in such a bad state? The focus is really in the House right now, where the majority of House Republicans are under pressure from a small group of conservative members, roughly around 10, that make up the House Freedom Caucus, that are demanding for deeper cuts to government funding. Additionally, the majority of the House Republican caucus says that they will not vote for a CR that does not include some sort of policy riders or funding to assist in the southern border crisis there. But also the biggest challenge, as I said, you have those 10 members in the House Republican caucus. They are the biggest challenge right now, saying because they will not vote for a CR period, even if it does include provisions that they would support. So the House is very much in stark contrast to where the Senate is, Democratic controlled Senate, where they've been working across the aisle with Republicans to pass bipartisan funding bills for FY24, void of any drastic spending or cuts. Senate leadership's ideal continuing resolution would be to keep the government fully funded under full FY23 levels, also include money to support Ukraine in their ongoing military efforts against Russia, also include disaster relief money. All of these non-starters in the House for the Republicans. I can't emphasize enough, there is a deep divide within the House Republican caucus. And right now we have a lot of moderate Republicans that are coming out and saying, hey, let's just work with our House Democratic colleagues to pass some sort of a CR. So this puts Speaker Kevin McCarthy in a very, very bad spot. Does he work to try to unite this deeply divided House Republican caucus and face a shutdown, or does he work with House Democrats and then to keep the government open and then run a risk of being hunted out of the Speaker's office? A whole lot, you know, so I don't want to be Kevin McCarthy right now. So what's next? Looking at the latest, and again, it's 3:01 p.m. So Senate action, right now they're moving forward with a bipartisan continuing resolution that includes the Ukraine funding and disaster relief. It will keep the government funded through November 17th. Currently, Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, has already come out and said he's going to object and he's going to slow down the process. So timing of the CR vote likely will be after government funding has expired. So sometime, you know, Sunday or late Saturday. House action today, Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker, came out and said, you know, even if the Senate does pass this CR, I'm not moving it to the floor. And so his plan is to bring up his own CR later this week. Voting timing on that still to be determined. He would like to pass 4 FY24 appropriations bills first before moving on to the CR. But the GOP leadership is very skeptical right now that the House can pass any bills, especially a McCarthy endorsed CR. So finally, what are the impacts to UNC's campus when we go into a government shutdown? Unfortunately, this is not our first rodeo, as I described. And so fortunately, we are very prepared for another shutdown were it to happen. Just as with previous shutdowns, even with the longest one, the 34-day shutdown, the direct impact to our campus community, it was very minimal. And so we know that we can weather this temporary storm. However, if this event were to prolong even farther, 2 months, 3 months, this is where the university, we would have to look working with Vice Chancellor Nate Knuffman and his team on cash flow challenges and things from there. But the good news is, as it relates to federal student aid and support for our students, that money has already been dispersed, so that will not be impacted. Looking at our federal research enterprise, our top funder being the National Institutes of Health. As with previous shutdowns, we have been fortunate that they have still allowed for the payment management system to be open. So this will allow for us to still be able to draw down funds to support research personnel and grant activities. Also, in my office, we are currently working with various campus units, UNC Research, Student Aid, Provost Office, Chancellor's Office, Comms, to discuss shutdown planning, communications moving forward, and also just, line of communication to discuss potential impacts as they might pop up. So we will have, working with UNC Research Communications, they will have a website up for our researchers, our faculty to be able to use to see timely information, guidance that's coming from federal agencies, and contingency plans there. So you all should be signed up for our DC Download, our weekly newsletter that comes on Fridays. So we will have much more updates because I know it's going to change from this presentation. But happy to take any questions you all might have.
So, interesting political theater, but practicality is, I guess, are we going to have any team members or students where we are going to need to set up alternative funding? I have friends that are involved with some of this, and people are ordered to kind of stay home, but then when they come back to work, they're paid for the time that they were not having to do that anyway. Can we reach into our piggy bank and then just get through this and not have to send people home and then have them have to play catch up at work later? And
Yeah, absolutely.
students, of course, I mean, I think some sort of certainty coming out from the university saying we'll bridge the gap for now
Mhm.
is would be the right approach.
Absolutely. And going past, off of previous shutdowns, again, working with Vice Chancellor Knuffman and his team, for example, we have a lot of faculty who are paid off of federal contracts. And let's say that the EPA, for example, sends a stop work order and says, nope, we're not paying you. You can't continue this work. Then that's where we use resources available here at the university to then float them. And so we haven't had any challenges in the past, correct? With that, and we hope that this will be a very short-lived shutdown. But if that were to continue, past a month, 2 months, that's where we would have to take a deeper look. But speaking from experience, I'm glad my husband does not work on Capitol Hill anymore, because I remember that shutdown of 2013 and trying to pay our rent and all of that. And so, yes, I know exactly where you're coming from. So thank you.
I just say exactly what Kelly said, is we've got bridge funding to support that, assuming it doesn't go on for 6 to 8 months. We're fine.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely.
Did anybody have any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, thank you, Kelly.
Yeah,
You deserve
thanks.
a happy end. All right. And now we get to hear from Vice Chancellor for Develop, Mike Andreessen.
Good afternoon. I don't know how to follow the state or the federal. That's complicated. I will say, having done this work for now over 3 decades, donors tend to respond to optimism, in my experience. And when we look at what the state has just done and continues to do for this university, I think it's remarkable. It's equivalent to about a $15 billion endowment, as far as I can tell. That's my development now. But between John's report and the state report, this university is incredibly well-funded. Maybe we always have more need, but I think donors respond to that. They don't want to give because we're a sinking ship. They want to give because they believe we have great opportunity. And so I'll make a few comments today about the state of fundraising. We do this every board meeting, and so I thank you for the invitation to do that. Buttons here to press. So in September, I'll always try to bring a little deeper dive into the June 30th, most previous fiscal year numbers. I shared with you the top line numbers at the July meeting. As I mentioned, I think the momentum is strong in spite of a year that was slightly down. We did report then that the national average of giving to higher education was down about 10%. And so we are thinking about that in terms of how we plan for the future. This was the number I reported, fiscal year 23, 587 million. That is down 27% from the year before. But we talked about the year before being that extraordinary year where we're trying to get to that original campaign goal of 4.2 billion, excuse me, 4.5 billion. And then, of course, as you know, we exceeded that dramatically. In the fiscal year 23, we were only down 4% in the number of donors. So donors' behavior maintained when you compare that to the 10% average in the country, but we did see on the top line number come down. If you take the average of the 4 years before the fiscal 22 high water mark, We're actually at 98% of that average. So I would say we have maintained the objective to use the campaign to sustainably raise more money on an annual basis. I just checked with Jeff and he shared with me that before the last campaign, Carolina was running about $300 million a year. So we're now running about $600 million a year. And we always want to try to be above that number. But as we think about the next campaign, which we won't have too much to say about today, but when we do in the future, there'll be an objective again to raise that overall look. On the cash level, we always want to make sure we look at cash compared to totals. And I shared with you in July that those were looking quite strong as well. Here's some new data. This is a breakdown of the 587 across the 26 different units that raise money. And you know that this is a very complex and decentralized university. But boy, that's a lot of great numbers up there. Our larger units, you can see, are carrying much of the total. That would be athletics, College of Arts and Sciences, UNC Health, Keenan Flagler. But I'm very pleased to report that last year, the Institute for the Environment, the School of Education, the School of Nursing, and the School of Social Work had their best year ever in terms of their fundraising. So we're excited to see all those units to continue to grow and build their fundraising prowess. One of the things you're going to hear me talk about a lot, and we've talked about fundraiser performance. That's usually individuals who do fundraising. Most of our work is what we call major gift work. That's we hire someone to make relationships with individuals who can give us $100,000 or more. A major gift in our industry is that of a gift of one's assets, typically not a gift of one's income. An annual gift is something you do every year, annually, typically in December, but not always. That comes from your income. So we're starting to look at what percentage of those school totals last year were for major gifts. And you can see the larger units are producing more major gifts. Here's another illustration. You can see the large College of Arts and Sciences had 122 major gifts last year. UNC Health, 330. Some of those smaller units have pretty small numbers. And so one of the questions we're going to ask ourselves going forward is how do we help build that base so that there are more sustainable large gifts to help those schools and colleges? That's the kind of post-campaign analysis that we do, and I'll have more to say about that in the future. But that's the first cut of where we are in the last year. Another update I'd like to share with you, and I mentioned this in the spring, and it's a bit confusing and may not even be of that much interest. If you do, I'm happy to give you more detail. But our industry, and that is higher education, universities, and universities that we compare ourselves to, and I've shared some of that comparison data in the past, try to compare each other with apples to apples. And there's a big debate about whether we're as truthful and honest with each other, because everyone's got a scorecard, right? You got to have the biggest campaign ever. We are proud to be in the $5 billion club. And we can tell you those universities that have made that achievement, and we are one of them. Well, our organization called the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, CASE, over the last decade, did an analysis and worked with some of the top universities around the country, including us, and said, could we standardize those counting standards? So we were doing a better job of comparing. And so in 2019, they issued new guidelines. But they also said, if you're in a campaign, don't change mid-campaign. It'll be too confusing for donors, too confusing for the institution. So we have made two changes to the way we're going to report our fundraising activity effective July 1 of this fiscal year to comply with those standards. Almost every university I know has had some measure of compliance. My previous institution, Oregon, first point here, minimum age to count an estate gift. Because we talked about in the last meeting, that life expectancy table I showed you, if gifts come out 50, 60 years from now, you're sort of overstating the impact of that philanthropy. So the new minimum is 65 years old. At Oregon, it was 60. So they're going through an adjustment. At Carolina, it was 50. So it's a bit of a bigger move for us. Secondly, historically, if gifts come from a federal agency, we call them grants, part of Kelly's report. And we don't call them private philanthropy. But there's been this middle ground where what happens if a federal grant goes to another agency or another entity, and then it comes to us? Do we count it as private or public? In many cases, we've been counting it private, and every university has been doing that. We are no longer going to do that. These two changes I'm projecting will affect our annual totals by about 15%. So 5 billion last time, we're going to do better next time, and we're going to address the 15%. Again, like everyone else doing the same thing. Nothing really new from what I reported in May, but I just wanted you to know the detail and the background on that, and you may have some questions. Okay, finally, just what have we been up to the last couple of months? We have been working to do that, what we call campaign feasibility and planning, to do the assessment, the hard work to figure out what the next fundraising effort should look like. And as you know from the Chancellor's report last meeting, there are 3 grand themes that are emerging. I'll remind you: health and wellness, workforce readiness, and the reimagined university. What does that really mean? For us, it means there are 3 buckets that all 26 units can begin to work together to identify fundraising priorities, set aspirational goals, and have some connective tissue to each other. In the coming months, you're going to hear more about these grand themes and the efforts we are putting in motion to build a fundraising campaign for the future. We have 4 training sessions scheduled for this year for our deans and academic leaders. The first one, unfortunately, is being rescheduled because it was the day after the tragic shooting on campus. So that'll be coming up in a couple of weeks. They are setting a baseline of fundraising in higher education so that everyone is playing from the same song sheet, understanding what fundraising at a major university should look like. 2, what's the role of a dean or an academic leader in that fundraising process? We'll do that in November. In February, we'll sit down and say, how do you go about setting priorities and metrics related to fundraising across all these units? And finally, in May of next year, we will actually work towards building a plan. I hope to engage you individually and collectively in that work, and we'll report out at every board meeting as we go forward. Part of the question we're asking ourselves, and I only have a couple more moments here just in terms of time check, is I'm quite confident if we just want to raise another $5 billion over the next decade, we probably can do it. We've shown we can do that. But if we want to do more, can we build the structure and the foundational support to handle more activity, larger gifts? So we're asking ourselves right now, staffing. Do we have the right number of staff? Are we retaining them? Frankly, are we hiring the right staff? That's part of our assessment. We're also going to set a new set of performance standards for our fundraisers, those major gift officers. I recently saw some data on the last campaign. Again, hugely successful. Our major gift officers in the last campaign, on average, made 8 visits a month and asked 3.5 people a year for a major gift. That's low. That needs to be 12 visits a month and maybe 12 to 15 asks a year. Again, we were wildly successful, but the opportunity to do so much better is there. And so we're going to set those standards. There's so much happening in technology, data, and digital innovation that we have to understand. Do we have those tools and those techniques and those resources to be thinking about the future? We need to increase our level of volunteer activity. There's the irrational love for this place is palpable. Everywhere I go, people love being a Tar Heel. How do we capture that and mobilize that in a new fundamental way? So to that end, I mentioned in the last meeting, we've hired 3 new ABCs. Our leadership team in UDO development is fully in place. I think it's the best team I've ever been a part of. I'm so proud to be sitting with them. But we had a retreat 2 weeks ago, and we spent a day asking ourselves, do we have a digital mindset? Do we have a pipeline for the next generation of donors? We have relied too much on the same donors for far too long. How are we going to identify the next generation of donors and engage them? And finally, how do we build culture, team, and performance in still a remote and hybrid environment? Every university is struggling with this question. So that's what we're working on. Okay, I'm going to end with one more slide. So we talked a little about ROI when I first came, and I told you I was proud that we generate $10 for every one we spend. I was honest that it's an unrestricted dollar we spend, as Nate knows, and then we return restricted gifts, deferred gifts, and endowment gifts. So it's not an exact return, but there is an inherent tension between showing you how great we can be at fundraising and how do we think about the long term. So this is the last campaign. 8 years plus, $5 billion. 98% of the 200,000 people who gave contribute a total of 6.6% to our total. And 1.8% of our donors gave 93% of that total. If you look at that chart on the right, if all we did was spend our time on the bottom 3 rows, we'd have a great ROI. But over time, we would run out of donors. We've got to spend time on the top row, building that next generation rows, and that's expensive. I once did an analysis years ago that the first $100 gift might actually cost you $100 to get, but then that donor gives for a lifetime. So we're balancing this question with precious resources. How do we build for the future and how do we take advantage of the present? And that's what I hope to keep talking to you about at the next meeting. Questions?
Thank you. Yep. Trustee Everett.
Yeah, just curious if you have any anticipation of how like the donation rates might change given the 2 events related to guns on campus. I know there was an influx of donations to student orgs themselves, but are you anticipating any changes for the university standpoint?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to thank you for how you were restating what we are doing, how we are counting the money. Not that we were ever doing anything that would be overstating what we were actually getting. But I think that raising from the age 50 to 60, I think that's exactly what you need to do. I think it's long overdue. And I think that you're referencing maybe the lack of production of some of the folks and how many visits they have and that sort of thing. I commend you for saying that publicly because I think you're addressing something that a lot of us had long suspected. And I applaud you for doing it. And I hope everybody will heed the example. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. And as you know, from when we talked in the spring, we've compared ourselves to other public institutions, and in many cases we hold our own, but it doesn't mean where we need to be. And that's what I intend us to focus on.
Marty.
I think there's an opportunity too, to use the new ROI data going back to the legislature and use that to target folks that have seen kind of the most significant benefits from the university over time. So that's something to watch and maybe look at how you might tap into that data and make a first ask if people have multiple school affiliations.
It's a great point, and particularly those alumni who are incredibly loyal but have not made the connection between how affordable it was and how successful they've been, and now they have an opportunity to return that favor. It's a great point. So thank you.
I actually have a question. What in the slide on major gifts, what would you, I mean, I can make guesses. What do you consider a major gift?
$100,000.
100,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Payable over 4 years.
Gotcha. All right. Well,
That's-
thank you. And I love hearing about the, what you've done with the training sessions with the deans and academic leaders. As a former fundraiser, that will be very helpful. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I think that concludes open session. So do we have a motion to go into closed session?
Madam Chair,
Trustee Valentine?
I move that the External Relations Committee go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, section 143, 318.11A1 to prevent disclosure of privilege or confidential information, and also pursuant to section 143-318.11A2.
Do I have a second? Trustee Cotis, any discussion or debate? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
You have to use those.
That's the final warning.
Greetings and welcome everyone to the September meeting of the University Affairs Committee. As chair of this committee, I must remind all members of their duty under the State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest and appearances of conflicts of interest. If you know of any conflict or appearance of conflict with respect to any matter coming before the committee today, please identify it at this time. Seeing none, Chris McClure, will you please call the roll?
Chair Jones,
Here.
Vice Chair Evans, Mr. Ballantyne, Mr. Bullock,
Present.
Mr. Bryan, Mr. Everett,
Here.
Mr. Patel, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Turner. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Before going into the 4 action items today, I would like to briefly address our admissions policy relative to the SFFA decision that came out earlier this summer. UNC strives to bring people together by fostering positive connections throughout the Carolina community, the state of North Carolina, our nation, and the world. It is good and right that the university will comply with the Supreme Court's recent decision regarding affirmative action. UNC should use this ruling as an opportunity to examine her admissions process and, in so doing, create a standard for other universities to follow. Ideally, the university will base such a standard first on the evaluation of each applicant as an individual, their scholarship, accomplishments, and character, rather than as part of a group, and then on how that person will best complement our campus community as a whole. This individualistic approach is predicated on the belief that true inclusivity cannot be achieved by dividing people into groups. Achieving true inclusivity is much more difficult because it requires the discovery of the common thread, the shared interest that unites people regardless of their outward differences. This discovery process takes time and a willing vulnerability to meet with others in an open and honest manner. If the university is the leading edge of society, then it is the place, perhaps the only place, for this type of discovery and unifying process to occur. This university, our university, the university owned by North Carolina citizens, should and will lead the way. John.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Jones. We have discussed just the need for the board to have sort of a holistic look at the admissions process and as well as other facets related to male, female students. Are we attracting enough men? And Dr. Jones has agreed to sort of chair an effort to look at that and work with Vice Chancellor Feldman, and we'll get that launched. So thank you.
Thank you. Our first action item for the day is to review and approve the open and closed minutes for the July 26, 2023 meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes? If so, may I get a motion to approve the minutes? Can I get a second? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Our next item of business is to review and approve revised faculty salary ranges for the College of Arts and Sciences. Vice Chancellor Mangini, and while you're here, do you want to? I mean, we can go through the voting process for the 2 items if you want to just okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start by congratulating you on your new role and welcoming you to the University Affairs Committee and to the chaos I sometimes bring you. I pledge to keep it interesting. I have a relatively short list of items before you today, and I believe the matters, both of them are relatively straightforward. The first, as you noted, is the approval of the revised tenure track and tenured faculty salary ranges in the College of Arts and Sciences. This body has received several of these requests over the course of the past year, as faculty salaries across the institution have not been adjusted for several years. In this case, the College of Arts and Sciences has worked with our office, with the Office of Academic Personnel, and with the system office to update their ranges using AAUDE data. Their methodology was to target the lowest average salary in the AAUDE for the specific disciplines for the assistant professor rank. And then they added 20% to that minimum to create the associate professor minimum, and another 20% to that minimum to create the full professor minimum. All of the range spreads follow the system office's requirements at 88% for assistant professors, 118 for associate professors, and 150 for professors and distinguished professors. The use of AAUDE salary data provides pretty solid baseline information, and the methodology for this effort is both sound and standard. I see this as a rather straightforward request, and I will note that the AAUDE data for fixed term faculty is not yet complete, is not complete. And as such, the college is still assembling the ranges for fixed term faculty members. We expect to bring those to you at the November meeting. But today I simply request your approval on this one.
Is there any discussion? Does anyone have any questions for Vice Chancellor? Trustee Cotis?
Just a question, kind of looking at this holistically, to look at the adjunct, the grad student and fixed term. Just so you can see kind of the range within the school.
Yes, so the groups, how they're governed and where the data comes from looks a little bit different, but as you likely know, we're making adjustments to SHRA ranges right now and looking at when they were last adjusted. We're doing that in tandem with the system office. It looks like the minimum increase is going to aim in the 7.5% and will go up to 25% based on how long ago those were adjusted. That's assuming OSHR approves those. In the case of EHRA ranges, we've seen those ranges be adjusted more recently. So we're trying to figure out where we are competitively based on the markets. We have done some graduate student adjustments more recently. So we don't go back quite as far. For many of the tenure track faculty ranges, they haven't been adjusted since 15, or since 18. So those are being adjusted. So we are looking at them in the whole, but we're also looking at when they were most recently updated, and who governs the employee type dictates when we get to update the ranges. Does that make any sense? It's a fairly complicated, but your point is remarkably well taken, that we need to look at the whole and see how are we bringing people along in tandem with one another.
Right, yeah, I mean, maybe not for right now, of course, but at your leisure, if we could get kind of an update that shows that, it would be interesting, even if it's for one school, just to compare.
Happy to work on that.
Any other questions? Seeing none, may I get a motion to approve these revised ranges? May I get a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Vice Chancellor, would you like to go into the next item?
The second item I have before you is an updated EHRA policy on non-salary and deferred compensation. This board last looked at this policy at the November 22 meeting. And at this time, I bring you a version with just 3 small edits. The first 2 edits are really the big ones, and they address the elements of the policy that consider housing allowances and moving expenses. So when we hire new people, depending on their rank and employee type, we have an allowance for housing allowance, and in some cases, or for moving expenses, and in some cases, housing allowances. This policy used to have numbers in the policy that outlined what those were, but those numbers didn't match the policy that Vice Chancellor Knuffman's shop keeps in the finance policies. What we've done now is simply remove the numbers on our end and reference the finance policies, in part because those are updated more regularly as part of a regular cadence. And we need to follow that policy. So we just want to make sure they're saying the same thing. So what we've done in the first 2 edits is just link to that policy. And then the last edit is one we've made in November of last year. You all agreed or approved a performance-based bonus program for EHRA employees. And we are putting that in play. But one of the things we failed to do is note the procedural element of that performance-based program, and that the payments are made in installments. And so all we've done in this edit is note that those installments, or that those payments will be made in installments. Again, pretty straightforward edits, though I'm certainly happy to take questions should you have them.
Does anyone have any questions? Seeing none, may I get a motion to approve these new revised policies? May I get a second? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Both those items will be placed on the consent agenda for tomorrow's board approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next item is, our next two items are for information only. And they have to do with an update on our fall 2023 registration from Provost Chris Clemens, Vice Provost for Enrollment Rachel Feldman, and Interim Vice Provost for Business Operations Kate Hens.
Thank you for having me, and let me add my congratulations to Trustee Jones on his chairship. I know we're in the interest of moving this along, so I'm going to follow the 3 rules of life that come from the great King Lear, who said, "Have more than thou showest, speak less than thou knowest, and lend less than thou owest." So we had a conversation. I know some of you talked to me during the fall registration, and I thought this would be a good chance to update you on a process of continuous improvement that Chancellor Guskowitz started along several dimensions. And this is about how we enroll students, especially first-year students. So Rachel Feldman has prepared a presentation that's going to walk through some of the efforts that we're undertaking to get better and better at getting our students enrolled in classes and to improve their experience. There's work to do there, but we've been doing the work, and I want you to know what's going on. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel. We also have, should there be questions, the registrar standing by, Kate Hens, who is also in the college and can address how we open new sections in a timely way. But let's have Rachel's presentation and then we'll get to the questions. Turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I'll try to be as fast as possible while actually answering your questions. I just, I do want to say that I know we've wanted nothing more than to improve the student experience and make this smoother and make it like a small private school experience for incoming students in particular as they come in, while dealing with the volume and the limitations that we actually have. And we have really great partners in the college with Dean White and Kate and all the SADs, and then Lauren DeGrazia, who knows all the things about registration, is here also to back me up and help me. So here I am trying to go fast. Okay, so this is our agenda, the things I'm going to talk about. First point of reference is, here was our increase in undergraduate headcount between fall 2022 and fall 2023. An increase for us of about 800 undergraduate students. So our incoming class was 270 more students. We had more transfer students. We had more students in Carolina Global Launch. You heard we had a tiny fall down in our 4-year graduation rate, and we had more students return to Carolina who had stopped out in like 2021, right after the pandemic. So this was sort of a storm of extra students. Not that we didn't plan for it, but it was more than we anticipated. That's fair? They're all nodding. Okay, so that's one piece of context. Where do I point the thing? There we go. Here's another thing we wanted to say. We know that students were frustrated, that students are always frustrated if they can't get in the very first round of registration the exact schedule they want. I don't blame them. When I got to college, I was mad about the exact same thing and shocked that I didn't get all the courses I want. It's hard to get out of high school. But we just wanted to show you the data that as of the first day of class, almost every single first-year student was enrolled full-time. And in fact, more of them were enrolled in a 15+ credit hour range, which is really where we'd like them to be to get quickly to graduation, than there ever have been in the past. So this is good. We got to a good place.
Here are a list of several of the projects that we have been working on in the past 2 to 3 years to try to improve the student registration and enrollment process and their experience. We completely redesigned the way we did undergraduate student registration appointments to be more equitable, understandable, to reduce student stress. We did a new project on how faculty can set aside seats, like for majors and minors and things. I hope that's not me. That won't interfere. That is not me with what we are doing. We did 2 different course setups projects, seat capacity and improvements to the wait list. And the reason the improvements to the wait list are important is because that will help people, especially in the college, but across the campus, really have a better understanding earlier on of the demand for courses so they can offer the seats in the classes that students really want and really need more predictably. With better information and data. A lot of this is just, we needed better ways to collect this data. We had a whole group collaborating with the college and people across my division on particularly moving students through this new ideas in action general education curriculum. And this group is going to continue. We've been renamed the Advisory Group on Student Progress through the Ideas in Action curriculum to meet, evaluate the data, see what's holding students back, make recommendations for changes. We made about 5 or 6 recommendations to the dean this year, mostly around class size, but about some other things around how we count prerequisites and transfers and the number of credit hours that we think will really help smooth the process and again, make it more equitable, make it more smooth. And then you know that we've recently done a classroom space utilization audit. And we're taking the things that were found in the audit and making improvements to how we schedule courses. And the provost is really working hard on that with the deans and the faculty to make sure we're really able to optimize the use of the classroom space we have. You know that there are some places we have physical constraints and things to do. We heard about that a little bit from the Vice Chancellor Knuffman during his presentation. And then, so those are the main ones. So here I'll go very fast. These were the changes we made to student registration. We developed a wave model. So now it's not so important that you get all your classes immediately because you have multiple waves in which to register. We made those appointments based on earned credit hours and terms in resident with special times for honor students. And of course, there are always groups of students with special times. We made them larger blocks, so no student would have their entire registration appointment during a class. That was a big stressor for both students and faculty. And then this has been incredibly successful and popular. I think we're finding that students are enrolled in more credit hours earlier and with less frustration. Why can't I make this? Okay. Reserve seat capacity. This was really a lot about communicating with students. They didn't understand why the class looked open, but it was full because we were holding seats sort of on paper on the side for majors or for minors. And it was really unclear. And now we have better messaging, better ability to look. We have better tracking to see if those seats actually end up being used. And we can do a better job with how many we leave for everybody and how many we reserve later. Please just jump in and correct me if I say anything wrong. Okay. We then did this waitlist project that really, we had a lot of also paper wait lists that faculty were using in different departments because it was too complicated or they didn't understand the way that our granted old enterprise system worked, or it didn't meet their needs. And both Lauren and Kate worked very closely with individual departments and faculty to get them to use the system. So we have better insight into the wait list. Students can wait list more credit hours now, so we can really see the demand for courses. Before they could only wait list one class, and that didn't tell us very much. It just told us which one class they didn't get that they wanted. Now they can wait list up to 12 credit hours, and we will soon have that data to be able to predict and offer classes. And here are other things we've done recently. I talked about the review of the space. We made these recommendations about increasing some class sizes, allowing for more hybrid options for certain gen ed classes. We're going to ongoingly meet, and we're talking with Summer about really increasing targeted summer offerings for high demand courses needed for degree completion and making some cool combinations of courses and research and other things available in the summer that will be attractive and that aren't based on any kind of deficit model, right? The cool opportunities to come through that we hope will relieve some of the pressure on those high demand things during the year. So we're trying, I hope you get this, like we're trying this very multi-pronged approach to do this from every angle. Okay, I don't know why it's now flying in, but here are the things that are true and that continue to be challenging for us. We have a brand new curriculum that we started last year, Ideas in Action. It's great, but it also has a lot of requirements and it created uncertainty for us because we weren't sure the patterns of student enrollment. So it made it less predictable and that showed up. When we looked at the data, which we look at all the time over the summer, you wouldn't believe how many spreadsheets I have and Kate has. And the data showed that in fact, in first year courses, there were plenty of seats for students, but the offerings didn't always match what they wanted to take. And that was the big problem, right? And we didn't have that information early enough or well enough to make shifts. And it's also, I mean, Kate and the dean might talk about, it's not so easy to just shift classes around for faculty, right? It's not so easy to just hire faculty at the last minute, even teaching faculty. And then, yeah, I'd say the college continues to monitor through the summer, and I think they're getting more flexible, but again, that is taking a while, and longer implementation of the waitlist project and experience with this curriculum will help us get better at predicting demand and help us get better. We also know there are some problems or some confusion. I don't want to say problems. There's some confusion caused that by students. So we did a lot of individual outreach to students who seemed like they weren't enrolled in enough credit hours. Literally, like one person in my office called every student that was under 3 credit hours to find out what was happening. And there was just a lot of confusion over the process. Some students thought they were supposed to register at orientation. Some students thought somebody was going to register for them. You probably have more stories. And so some of this we think could be solved by having a tighter bridge between when students first are admitted, orientation and advising and the registration process. So we've proposed that we have a work group and probably an OE project that will look at sort of student onboarding, I'll say, like not just orientation, but the whole kind of process on and how we can make that smoother, easier, better communicated so that students have the best experience that they can. Good. Okay. Everybody likes it when I talk. Was that a question?
For students, you mentioned the waitlist process, which again, I think you're trying to make sure you understand the demand and understand the ideas that actually starting in maybe is there, I mean, do students have any opportunity when they look at the whole list of classes to get feedback down about they is there a way to understand demand even before registration?
Give me one more slide. Where do we go from here? I think it's on this slide. So I mentioned the operational excellence project we want to do around onboarding. The next thing we want to do is invest more in technology that we think will help. So we have a chatbot we got, which is very helpful, 24/7 service to students, can answer basic questions. We funded that through our federal relief funds during COVID, so we need to find a source of funding for that chatbot. It's at the enterprise level. We'll be talking about that during budget. The next thing we want is to purchase a piece of integrated software. It lives and integrates with our system that allows students to do, oh, I can see I made a typo there, sorry, multi-term schedule planning. So they can put in like their shopping cart and it'll have paths that it suggests and multiple courses so that we can see ahead of the semester start what students, now, of course, they'll change, but we'll have a better idea earlier on those paths and where we should be bulking up and where we could be cutting back and a better idea. And that's really more the expertise of Kate and Jim and those, but it would help us. And that software would also come with a better front end for students. So one of our problems is that, and I know you're a parent of a student, so you'll agree, the underlying system we have is highly functional. It does a lot of things and it's ugly. Oh, you're both parents. Yeah, it's ugly. And so students do, yeah, and Rob, the students do not like to use it. And so they will avoid it, and that's part of the problem. So we would like to get this software that would help put a layer between them and the ugly, but also allow us to gather all this data in the background to help. And then we're really, really in the college and with Chloe Russell and Kate, looking at this case management approach to advising and really revolutionizing the way we do advising on this campus. And then the last thing is our advisory group that'll just keep coming back in, looking at what's best, making suggestions, and trying to pivot as we go to make things better and better. And I think I went as fast as I possibly could. Trustee Evans.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you for that. That's really thoughtful. Is this information available publicly anywhere?
This slide deck?
The initiatives that you've already identified that are underway, is there a place where new parents can see that?
Oh, good question. I think the projects under OE are on the OE website.
Is it?
And we also have help
Yeah.
website. I don't know if it's someplace we would put parents or depending what students for.
Yeah.
It would be very helpful.
Well,
We
if
should think
anyone's
about
on
that.
the 2023 new parent Facebook page, you've really addressed substantially all of the pain points. So I really applaud you and your team, and I know how good you are and how hard you work, and so thank you. I think you've done such a great job, and this is really going to go. First of all, when is the software going to be ready, and how much is it?
Well, I'm obligated to say we haven't done actual procurement work yet, but
Because I think that the Vice Chancellor for Development could raise a lot of money if new parents knew this was coming. I mean, there are a lot of new parents just really wanting it to be better and understanding we're a large public institution and that so the ugly underface of software is awful. But I think that there's a real opportunity here to match a pain point with a solution and some funding. So congratulations.
thank you.
I would advertise this.
We'll think about like the best way to,
Yeah.
without over promising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
I'm just curious, I should have asked this at the top, just as a matter of context. I'm not as close to this, but is this a process and system that's trying to go from good to great or average, trying to in search of good? Just where are we? And I don't want to put Trustee Everett on the spot, but I will. I'm just curious from a student perspective, just your reaction here. Is this responsive to on the ground student experiences in terms of interim solutions and just where we are? But just two questions, context. I'm not sure where we are. I have no idea. And maybe I should have started with like, what's our problem statement that we're trying to solve? What is our current situation? Again, I'm a little bit removed from it, so I should have asked.
Yeah, I think there are a few things. I mean, one, we just want students to have an excellent experience and think well of the university. I like to think that like my admissions office and my onboarding offices give students great care and get them through and are very responsive. And what we don't want to do is take them from this curated experience and then drop them into software that looks like 1993, which is sort of what we do. True, I can, please.
Yeah, no, I think I would say from my POV, I think struggling with like registration is kind of just like part of it. I think as you go on, it gets easier. Like I'm a senior now, so I get first pick at everything. But I think a lot of these changes being made are exactly what we need, especially in terms of the registration blocks being longer. Because I mean, I've been in class with registration, that's been very difficult. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Becky.
Part of our process is actually all of these projects, so they're represented on all of it.
Yeah, we always use students as part of the committee because otherwise we're not doing it right.
Steve Blaine.
Thank you. I was going to ask the same. How do you forecast what classes you need to offer?
Okay.
So historically, we would look at the historic patterns of what course taking students have taken. With the first year, as we said, it was a little challenging because of the new curriculum. So a lot of courses were pre-described in that first semester, and we weren't quite sure what courses students would like to take as their maybe I don't know, 12th, 15th hour.
Right.
And so we had enough seats, but we weren't quite sure where the student interest was going to go. So normally we just rely on historic behavior, and then we can look at students' interests when they come into Carolina. What do they want to major in? And then we have a kind of a sense, how many are science majors? Well, likely they need biology or chemistry. And so we can do a little bit of forecasting based off of the major and where those new students likely might go.
Paul,
This may just be a completely novel idea, but I think all of us are alums, and I mean, I've far predating y'all's tenure in your present jobs, because you're such young ladies. I mean, yeah, I remember how hard it was to get the classes I wanted even beyond my first year. Granted, I was here for 6 years to get a 4-year degree, so I had a lot of experience.
We're trying to make that novel.
But I mean, maybe this is a novel idea, but why don't we just ask the students what they want to take? And then try to, as opposed to guessing. It seems like if you build out this technological platform, it sounds pretty impressive. You could just ask them to go ahead and forecast, instead of having to forecast, you could know.
You don't have to go anywhere.
So-
So that's sort of the idea of the software, is that by allowing them to put in like their desired majors and their desired paths, it gives them, like, they don't always know what are all the courses I need to get this degree, but they do sort of know their interest and their path. And again, they may change because they're young, but that is the idea, that if we can collect more of that upfront, and they can do that before the actual registration period, so we already have that data, then we can begin to shift. Although there are always limitations, right? I mean, we have tenured faculty, and then we have teaching faculty, and they're not like high school teachers. You can just come, not that the state of North Carolina is so great at always filling our high school classes either, but there are real challenges to trying to match, but this will allow us to at least know what direction we're going and to do the long-term planning that's involved in. But that is the whole idea of this software, is that they could sort of like fill a shopping cart, and we could say, oh, look, people want the grape flavor soda. They're not so interested in the strawberry. I don't know why I came up with two really not good sounding kinds of soda.
Yeah, you're not scaring me. Oh, that's very helpful. I don't have a child at Chapel Hill, but I got absolutely more complaints and questions about the registration process in the last 6 or 8 weeks than anything else. I'm really glad to hear we're addressing.
Thank you.
Trustee Cotis.
So I think it's supply and demand here, right? So I think part of the issue is we've had a supply of certain things that we're wanting to sell. And so you don't ask people if they want to buy something when you've got this product to move a little bit. And that's what we have with tenure and existing classes and what people want to teach. And then you've got the demand side of it that is the variable. And so you don't ask a question unless you really want to answer it and deal with it. But I think that the IT solution, multi-term planning will at least give us that data. And then we're making an informed decision, and we know what the pain points are and the problems and how we can address it. So, if they could sign up or something like that and then go ahead and commit to a class that they really want, that would, I think, appease a lot of them. But it's also all the moving parts, the jigsaw puzzle of it, which is the complicated art. And then you've got the hiring. Can you get enough to fill the demand? Because you can't just say, well, tomorrow we're going to teach this and then hire everybody you need. You've got to make sure you've got a ramp up period for that to bring them in. So it sounds like, so did I hear that procurement was underway with the multi-term?
Not yet, but we have to ask for the budget for it, but I would love for the
Yeah,
procurement to be underway.
I think there's a whole lot of interest in that. We've heard. And then looking at that ROI report and looking at this to see where we need to make changes and what or understand our limitations as to what we can do and can't do. So great response on that, though.
Trustee Everett.
Really quickly, I'm just curious if there have been any initiatives to maybe expand the accessibility to the platform, particularly in terms of like different languages. I'm not sure if you all have had any work there.
I know that we've worked on like admissions and financial aid, multi-language availability and having call centers that can translate. I don't know that we've thought about that, but that's good feedback. We can take that back.
Trustee Pryor. Chairman Pryor.
Just in the interest of time, a little program note. We have a van that's supposed to take us to the innovation lab at leaving in just a few minutes. So I'm going to make a motion that we put the update on the School of Civic Life and Leadership to tomorrow, so that we give that the time that it needs. Do I need a second? Do we need? Yeah. So I make that motion.
All in favor?
Who's the second?
Should I go sit down?
Chair Ball.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes.
Is there
One. I'm sorry.
In the closed.
I would like to make one comment
Closed session.
for this, and then we will also plan on addressing the personnel issues in closed session tomorrow during our closed session and for the full board. I have two students that are here, and this summer I heard so many complaints from concerned parents about not being able to get classes. And then oftentimes, I would hear about a student that had an intended major, but they weren't able to get classes, or they wanted to apply to the business school and they weren't able to get the classes necessary to be able to do that. And I wanted y'all to come and address this issue, not so much as an opportunity for the board to kind of, poke y'all with a bunch of questions and whatnot, but really to highlight that this is a very practical issue. And I think that y'all took a very pragmatic approach in a very timely fashion to be able to address this issue. To Trustee Evans' point, this is the kind of thing that I think that the broader, the parents of students would really like to hear about. I mean, this is something that we should really be, promoting and telling people about, because this kind of shows that the university isn't just, a bunch of people in ivory towers thinking about ethereal problems. I mean, this is a real world problem. So I think we should do a little bit better job of trying to promote that. And finally, it's kind of a preview of what the student career services, although that needs to be renamed, but what that work groups, our recommendations coming out of that, if we're going to go earlier in their timeline here at the university, I think there's a lot of synergy between what the work group would like to do in terms of being able to help students discover their aptitudes, elicit some goals and, a purpose for the time that they spend here at Chapel Hill. And certainly academic counseling and being able to take certain classes plays a big part of that. So I think there's a lot of synergy between what that work group is doing and what y'all.
We need to learn how to talk about it more publicly.
But, as with a lot of things, I mean, rumors sort of fester in the dark. And if you don't
in this space and how do we get there? I appreciate software and other tech solutions that we can add on in the interim, but you also don't want to create tech debt. If that, when you look at an end game and what defines best in class, like you have to make different course corrections along the way. So I really like Trustee Everett's comment on suggestions that that's another exercise, like what defines best in class. In between where we are and there, that's your roadmap that can facilitate efficient decision making.
I think that's really smart. And one of the things, I'm sorry, that we have done periodically and that we should be doing again is looking at peer institutions and what are best practices and what's the university system that we wish we were and like how close can we get to that and what will it take? So I think that's where I said like, we'd love it if we could provide that like small, private, curated experience, but to a much larger class of students and with a bit more constraints. But thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just weigh in to say, I want to thank Rachel and the whole team. They think about this so I don't have to, and summarize what I think the action items are. We're to put up some better guidance that we're doing this, where it's visible so people know what it is, to define what it is the end state needs to look like. And if it makes sense in that context, to proceed to procurement on some solutions. I'm saying this for Nate's benefit. Our chief financial officer is hearing that we can proceed to procurement. So we will get to work on it. Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you. Given that we are going to hold our skill discussion till tomorrow and address personnel issues in closed session, I believe we can adjourn. So may I get a motion to adjourn? Perfect.
The judge, we can get on the